Hey there, full stack, React, and Next.js Pro. Do you want to build a full functioning real world web apps without the hassle of managing an express backend? Are you tired of piecing together random tutorials that leave you frustrated and stuck? Then this is the course that you have been looking for. Now, why do you need this course? Being a front-end developer is not just about writing UI components anymore. The game has changed. If you want to stand out and build complete, scalable applications, you need to master full-stack development using Next.js alone without even Express backend. So, no extra backend frameworks anymore. Now, this course will teach you how to leverage Next.js as a full stack framework, handling data fetching, authentication, server-side logic, and API routes as well, all inside Next.js. Now, you might be wondering why this course is different and why should I stick to it? Well, no more confusions for you here. Everything is explained step by step in very simple English without even any complex jargons. Then you'll have a hands-on learning. We'll build a complete app together so you actually understand what is happening. And of course, no backend, so no problem. We will learn how to handle everything inside Next.js itself without needing Express or other backend frameworks. And in the end, of course, the industry best practices, we will be learning how to write scalable, maintainable, and production-ready code that companies will love. Are you ready to level up? If you are serious about becoming a top-tier front-end and full-stack engineer, this course is your shortcut. And don't just be another React developer, be the one who builds and deploys and scales full-stack apps with Next.js. So let's dive in and start coding.
Now that we have a basic understanding of what Next.js is, let's dive into setting up a project and running it as well. We'll also explore the basic file structure to familiarize ourselves with the foundation of our application. If you visit the official website of Next.js, you can see on your main screen, it is simple as just run this command in your terminal. So go ahead, open up your terminal. I'll open up my IDE, which is Visual Studio Code, and I will use the built-in terminal within my VS Code. Just make sure you're pointing to your folder where you want to create your app. Then just run this command npx space create dash next dash app at latest. And latest will make sure that you are installing the latest version of Next.js. The latest version at the moment of this recording is the new version which came up just a few weeks ago, which is the version 15. Now, space and then the folder name you want to create, audio commerce. I hit enter. As soon as you hit enter, you'll come up with a lot of questions to answer, which will help you to configure your project. So we'll go through some of them and we'll just keep some of them as they are to default. So you can see here the version coming up is 15.1.5. I'll say yes. And then it will ask me, do I use TypeScript? Actually, I'll say yes for this one. And don't worry if you're not familiar with TypeScript, because again, it's just JavaScript with some extra code for type safety. So you will find if you are not familiar with TypeScript as well. So we'll hit yes. ESLint, I'll say yes. Tailwind CSS, again, if you don't know what is that is just a library which help you with styling and avoid to write your own CSS. So I'll use that too. I'll say yes. And I'll keep other ones also to yes. I want app router. TurboPack is some new tool within Next, and I'll just say no for now. I'll say no to this as well. And then to create basically the project for me. That one is done, you can just do cd and your file name, your folder name you created. So audio, I said commerce space, and then I'll just say npm run dev, and then that should run my project on the local host for 3000. So let that one run, and usually the first time it just takes a little bit longer. And there we go. I can just do control and click, and that should open it up in my default browser. As soon as that one runs and it open up my browser, I can see the home page or default home page for my boilerplate, which just showed the basic message. And instead, if you do any changes you want to start, go visit this page right here and you can start doing your changes. So let's go open up our code and go through the file structure. So it is basically very basic. You have your public folder that we'll not be touching now. Then you have your source folder. And inside your source folder is where your all application will be going. Okay. Then the first thing you have is global CSS, which is your, like it says, it's the global CSS for your application. It's all there. Are also importing the Taiwan CSS here, so it is accessible to all our application. The next one we have is the layout, and layout basically is, as it says, is a common layout for your application. And we will go in details into this later, how you can have different layouts for different pages as well. Now this one basically, for example, you have common header, common footer, usually import them here and wrap them within your main components or main pages. That is for that for now. And what I will do is just change the title. I'll say my audio e-commerce. And let me fix the spelling. I'll call it my audio shop, for example. Okay, and description, shop for all the amazing audio items. Okay, so that will be the title of my page as I changed there, but we'll do more things later. Now the page.tsx, that is what, or the tsx is what we are seeing in our home page. And if we go, for example, and just remove all these, let me actually clean up all this and say just hello from my shop. And as I click save, first you see my terminal is again rerunning. If I visit my website without even reloading, I can see my changes immediately on my browser. Good. Now let's go back to our app, and this feature basically is very amazing, to be honest with you. Okay, it saves you a lot of time during development. Now what I will do, actually, I'll clean up all this because I don't need all this. So I'll make my app ready for me for next thing I come back. So I'll just remove the footer and also remove all this. I'll just say for now hello and remove this image from there, and let's save that. Now let's close this. Next thing I want to do basically is just take you through this. So here basically just ESLint config, which help you to add some configuration regarding your rules. It have a basic configuration, but you can extend this if you are familiar with it and you want to play with this one. Next one is the Next.js config, and at the moment there's nothing here configured. We may do later some configuration as we need it. The next thing basically is your package.json, which have list of your dependencies, and you can see we are using actually current latest version of React, which is version 19, and also we're using the latest version of Next.js, which is version 15 for the dependencies, the main dependencies. Then we have our scripts. So we have the dev one that we run, which run our project locally. Then you have the build and start and lint as well. The next thing is basically the TS config, because we're using TypeScript, so there's some configuration for TypeScript. So that is the folder for it. The next one is basically the Taiwan, the CSS config. So that if you remember, Taiwan CSS is the library we're using for styling, and usually you have to add some configuration to make it pick up the changes. Where are they and which folders they are? And that's what we are doing at the moment right here. So that is a very basic setup we have done, and basically we'll be changing these things as we need through this project. So make sure you don't skip any part of this project and keep following to be able to get the most of it. You have successfully set up and run a Next.js app. In the next, we will be starting building the pages for our e-commerce application. So let's just keep going. Now that we have set up and run a basic Next.js application, it's time to start building the pages for our application. So our project will have, for the starter, 4 main pages. The first one is basically the product list pages. We will display the list of the products that we have. Then we will have a product detail page, which you visit upon clicking an item, which shows the details about a specific product. Then of course we'll have the cart page, which display items in the shopping cart, and then we'll have a checkout page that handles the checkout process. So first, you need to have an understanding on how pages get created in Next.js. Well, Next.js uses a file-based routing system, meaning the folder structure in the app folder that we have right there directory directly maps to the URL structure of your app. So each page corresponding to a page.tsx file located in a folder that defines its own route. For example, we have app and then we have page.tsx, and that represents basically the home page that we accessed earlier just using the local host without even having any other slash right there. Okay. Now, to create a new route like slash products, for example, we need to create a folder, create products inside our app, and then inside that folder or directory, we will add a file called page.tsx. Sounds good? Now let's create our 4 pages by following these steps. So go inside your app folder directory and create a new folder that we will call products. And make sure you're inside your app. So inside my app, new folder called products. Then inside this product, I'll add a file that I will call page.tsx. Now inside this component, we'll define a very basic page to start with, which will be a very basic component called product page, and we are just displaying a product header at the moment. Good. Now next thing we'll do for the product details page as well. So go inside your app folder, create a new folder that we'll call products details. Now, product details, you might already have in mind if you have experience with development that this should be a dynamic route, but we will jump into that later. So now just stick with creating a very basic structure to start with. So we'll create a folder called product details, and then inside same thing, we'll create a new file called page.tsx. And same thing here, we'll just paste a basic component that I call product detail page, and I'm just displaying the header as well. Now let's move on to the next page, which is the cart page. So again, same thing, a new folder called cards, and then inside there we'll create a file called page.tsx, and then I'll just create a basic component which called cart page. Now you can see I'm exporting them as well, so make sure you are doing that too, so we can access them actually through our application. Now next page, last page or not last, just for now, we are creating our checkout page. So I'll create a new folder again called checkout, and then inside I'll create again our page, which is page.tsx. And inside there we'll create again a basic component for now, which is called checkout page, and we'll be just returning again a header of checkout. Now with the development server running, so make sure your server is running, we can go now to our UI and access these pages. So we can do /product, and you can see, I can see my header here, products coming up. So let me make this one bigger actually. So you can see my header there coming as products. If I go to product dash details, can access as well that page, or actually, did I name it wrong? Let me check. Product, just double check. So product details, just let's rename it and copy it. Product. Actually, I call it product detail and not details. So I'll just keep it detail for now. So product detail, let's save that. Let's go back and let's actually access that too. And that is not working because I did a huge mistake here. So it's not pages, it should be page. Okay, that then it should work. Let's go back to our UI and let's hard reload. And there we go, our product details is coming. Now next thing basically is to test the cart page. And I have my shopping cart, then the checkout. And I do have now my checkout page as well working. Now, although the pages are currently simple, this does demonstrate how Next.js dynamically maps folder path to the URLs, which is a main functionality of Next.js. If you're using a normal React application, it doesn't work like this. You need to import third-party library, and then you have to create routes actually to do that. Now, the key takeaways of this chapter is that routing by convention, folder names in app slash define the URL structure for our application. Then you have the page component. So a page.tsx file is required in each folder to render content for that specific route. Then the URL matching, Next.js checks if a page.tsx file exists at a given path and renders if it is found. Now you have mastered the basics of creating pages in Next.js. In the next chapter, we will add interactivity and structure to these pages, and gradually we are transforming them into the fully functional components of our e-commerce application. So just keep going. Now, because I'll be building a part of this big, huge e-commerce application, I want to follow a little bit the same design and the color combination they're doing. So what I have done is I went to my code and I add some basic configuration to my Taiwan CSS with the new colors listed right here. Again, you don't have to do this step because again, this tutorial is focused on the actual Next.js, how it works as a full stack. But I just want to follow a little bit of design. I went also to my global CSS, also updated my variables there as well, but I'm not doing much with them. So they're just ready for me there when I want to take my application to the next level. Also, what I have done as well, because I'm using TypeScript, I create a new folder for types and added a type which called iProduct, which have these types that I'll be using for my product to start with. So any product I list, this should have an ID, an image URL, a name, a description, and price as well. After this, all what I have done, I just created a random data pointing to some images, having random prices, random IDs, and random names to start with as well. Okay, so basically it's an array of projects, and each projects have ID, name, image URL, description, and the price. Same type we defined it there. And then I import my type here to say that this product, it is an array of this type interface. So that's out of the way. Another thing I have done is that I created an image folder inside my public folder, which I call audio images, and that's where my products images are there. So what I will do is just copy this name and update here my URLs as well. So it will be slash this, and same here, I have to update that. So when we want to point to it in our UI, it will have access to these images as well. So I just have to make sure I fix this. Oops, there we go. Okay, so our dummy data now is ready. Let's go and actually start building. So let's go inside our app and I'll create a folder for my components. And basically here I'll create all my custom components, which are the small pieces of my UI. So usually there are a lot of structures you can follow. My preferred one is the atom design pattern, but I will do that in the end of this project when I'm doing some refactoring to know where are my atoms, where are my molecules, and so on. So for now, I'll just list all the products inside my components folder. So I'll create a new component called products, which will be the list of our products.tsx. And also I will have a new one which is called product itself. Okay, so if I go back to my product components, I'll generate a new component which is called products. And basically here, this component will take in property which is called product. And this will be of type, again, if you're using JavaScript, you don't have to do step. So it will be of type React.functional component, and it will be taken in a product prop, which will be of type of product that we, which will be of type product that we defined earlier as well. And that will be an array of this product. Okay, so basically this one is just your prop name. I'm telling that this prop name or this property will be of type of an array with objects of this type here. So what I will do is I'll import also this component here because I like to keep my things separated. So I will create this component, which will be just product. It doesn't have anything at the moment. And I will go and import it too. So import product. And what I will do is I'll say I will go and map to my product. So I'll say product, so that's come as my prop dot map. And with my app map, whenever you have a product, what I will do is I will return basically my child component should be the product, and that will take a property called product that will pass on the product I'm reading now. And of course, same as standard React, when you are mapping, you have to pass a key, which should be a unique, and I'll pass for another product.id because that's I know that will be a unique property. Good. Now inside my product, I have to pass on this property now. I'll go here, say it's having a property of product. Here also have type of React dot functional component, which takes in a property which called product, which should be of type I product. And that is the amazing thing. If I create this interface in a separate file, I just can reuse it everywhere I need it without have to redo it again and again. Now here actually we will render our components. So what I will do, I will paste some code quickly so you don't see me typing slowly, and we'll be fixing it together actually. Okay, so here basically just some styles using Tywin CSS to make sure my UI is working. But here to be my URL or the source will be pointed to the product I'm passing dot image URL. But actually before I keep changing this, let me close this tab on the left. When you're using Next.js, you have basically a built-in component called image that you can use. And basically when you use this image component from Next.js, it have a lot of performance enhancements and also functionality built in that can enhance our application. So instead of keep changing this, I will go and import image from Next.js, okay? And I will go here and I'll say that's image, and I'll have of course the source, and that will be the product dot my image URL. And usually it's very good approach to have an alt text, and not just because it's good approach, but it is actually a must. And the reason why, for many reasons, accessibility, if you're familiar with accessibility, it helps the users to know what this image about. So usually you can pass it some description or some detailed one or just a name. At the moment, because I have dummy data, I'll just pass the product dot name. And next thing, I'll just pass all those classes I defined, which help me to style my component. And then I'll close it off, and I can remove that HTML image tag. Great. Now next thing, basically I have my button here. At the moment it have on-click function, which doesn't do anything. So I'll remove it, and we'll actually come back to it later when we start working on the cart section. Now I displayed my image. I want also to display, for example, the name of my product. I'll add an H to it, and that should be displaying my product dot name. And again, I just add some styling here from time with CSS. And same thing for the price. I'll just say it is my product dot price. And you can use any third-party library if you want to, format your number for the price so it looks much more friendly. Good. Now we have our product component ready, and we are mapping through it as well and displaying in our UI. The next thing we want to do basically is just to go and run our app and see if this is working as expected. So let's run our server and npm run dev. And let's go to our UI. Let me see if this is running. Yeah. Let's go to our UI and we go to /product. And now just remember, I didn't import my new components, my product page. Our page, which is the product.tsx page, and make sure you're opening the correct one. Okay, so we want the page under the product, so go open up that, and you can go up here and import your product components we just created. Then we'll go ahead and just display it in our UI. So instead of just displaying a header, let's do this empty fragment, and I'll send h1 products, and then I'll just run display my products list. And if you remember my component, so if you remember my product component is expecting this product prop, so we can pass in actually the dummy data that we created. So let me import that. Import, and if I remember my data, I call it products. I'll show and rename it. I'll say products data, so we don't have any more confusions. And go back to my page. I'll say import product data for my data, and then I'll pass on that product data to my product components. Good. Now that's out of the way, let's go run our UI again. And let's make this one bigger and we'll make this one smaller. You can see here basically it is complaining that this event handler can be only within a client-side component. I don't want to go in depth at the moment in that. So what I will go and do, I'll just remove this onClick function. I will come back to it later. Let's save this. Let's go back to our UI. And now it's complaining about the path actually we have created. So we use the image components basically to render our images. And when you do that, it is required to pass some width property. So we have to go back basically to our product, so we have to go to our end, and I have to add a width here. And let's just give it, for example, 200. Let's run our UI again. And now saying the height as well. So let's go back and add that one too. So height, and now say that's equal to 200 too. Now let's go back to our UI again. Okay, so there we go. My UI is somehow running, but the images are missing actually. So let me make this one smaller. Actually, my format is wrong here. So I'll just change that to just JPEG. And let's save this. And let's run this. And there we go. Now we got our UI working. Let me just make this one bigger. Now, one more thing I want to do basically is just to fix the layout a little bit. So let's go back to our code. And what we'll do, this wrapper right here, I will update it so it has some CSS classes. So I'm just using the grid basically. I'll say I have a column 1, but in medium size, I want to have 3 columns, and this is the spacing between the columns. Now let's save this and go back to our UI and how to reload it. And there we go. Now our list looks much better. Our items are aligned together, and also they look much good. Now if I make this one smaller, you'll see now I only have 1 item per row at the moment. Now what I have done to fix a little bit my UI so it looks similar a little bit to my design, I add some more configuration to my time with CSS, where I declare basically a new class for my primary button. I add all configurations I need so it's easy a little bit to look like my design. So this way, anytime I use a button in my app with a class of BTN primary, they will always have the same design, okay, without creating actual component for that, just for designing. Now, other thing is I just set up the background of my app to full white so I can see the cars showing up on my screen, which means in my product, I just remove all the class I had there. I just add BTN primary, which is great for me, means it's shorter. And now let's go and run my server npm run dev. And let's open our UI. I'll just have to reload. And you can see now my app looks much better, much cleaner and neater, and also it's responsive. If I resize my window, it's not breaking in any size. In smaller ones, I'm seeing 1 item per row. Otherwise, I can see 3 items per row. Now, next thing we want to do basically is to make these buttons work, and we want to click them. We want to go basically to the product details we created earlier. So let's go back to our code. And let's open up first our product component because we want to make these buttons clickable, okay? Now, there is something in Next.js we can use, which we call link components, which help us to navigate between the routes. So we can go and import that. So import link from Next.js link. And then we can just come here. I'll say it's a link. Okay, I'll keep the same class name I used right here. And then we can add a ref property, and basically here you can add the link of the page that you want to navigate to. And for me, this one will be dynamic because I want the page I'm navigating to display me every time the details of a different product. But in behind the scene, it is actually the same page component we are going to create. So I'll be slash, for example, product, which I'll change this route also at some point in a few seconds. So it will be slash product. So what I will do to explain that is that I will move basically this product details under the product. So this is slash product. then slash, and let's say I want to access the product by the ID. So I will say the second route will be actually all ID, so product dot ID. Good. Now I will go and close this, and now I will go and close this and add the C product inside there and remove this button from right here. Okay, now next I want to do is go to this product details and move it under my product folder. So yes, move it. And then next thing is that I want this route basically to be dynamic. The way we do that in Next.js is very simple. You just remove the name and have the brackets, and then inside is the parameter you'll be using. I will call my parameter product ID. Okay, so basically this means that you can access this route using slash product slash anything, slash product slash one, slash product slash banana, slash product slash 100, whatever you like. Now let's go and test this first. So I'll go back to my just hard reload, and let's click the first one, see product, and you can see it's navigating me to slash product slash 100 111, which is the ID of my product, and I can see the product details. Now, if I try the second product, same thing. I can see my ID right there, and same product details page, and same other one as well. Now, next question you may have is that how we can actually access that ID and get the details from our backend. So go ahead, for now we're still using the hard-coded data, but don't worry, at some point we'll be creating our own APIs within Next.js, so to be more dynamic. But for now, the amazing thing about Next.js is that when you have dynamic routes, it gives you these parameters ready for you to use. So your components basically have access to a property called params. Okay, and that one is available for you from Next.js itself. Now I have to come here to the time of my param because I'm using TypeScript. So I'll say my props have a property of params, and that property will be of type of object, which accepts a prop called product ID. So whatever the name I named right there, so product ID, and that will be type of string. Good. Now I have access basically to my param. What I can do for now is just import the list of the product I have. So import product data for my data that I created earlier. And then for now, what I will do, I'll just map to find my product. So const product, and that's equal to products data dot find, and I'll find the elements that their ID are matching basically my param ID. So dot ID, oops, here should be an arrow. So whatever my params dot, actually that should be product ID, it is the same as my product dot ID. So basically this will return me back just a matching product. For now, what we will do, we will just return the product name to make sure it is working. So I'll say display for me and h1 with product dot name. And to make sure this is not breaking, you have to make sure the product does exist. So I'll just add an exclamation mark. So if my product exists, then display for me the name of that product. Okay, now let's run this and see if it's working. So just hard reload. I'll click the first one, and you can see I can see the name of my product. I'll try the same other one. There we go. We can see the second one too, the third one, and that is it. So basically our now dynamic route is working as expected. Now, next thing we want to do is build some logic around our cart page, and we will start with basics, but of course we change when we start implementing and creating our API endpoints. So first of all, we need some kind of state where we'll store, for example, the IDs of the items being added to our cart. For the start of now, just to make sure everything is working and we have the shell ready, we'll be using the use state from React, but in real-time scenarios, that's not the way you will do it. You'll be using like a third-party library like Redux or Zustand or even Context API if you want to store this kind of information, because you need to access them through your application. But to start with, let's start with that first and we'll refactor later as we need. So I'll import use state from React. And because this is a hook from React, the hooks are only allowed to be used within functional components, and they have to be a client-side component. Now, what does mean for me? Because we are using Next.js. Next.js by default, all the components you create, they are server-side components, which means they are built and created on the server, then they're pushed all at once ready to the client. But when you're using useState, those type of hooks, they're only working within client components, which they get built within the browser. And usually that means there's some interactivity as well with the customers. Now, for this reason, I have to tell Next.js that this component is going to be a client component. And to do that, we have to use client. Now, the drop of this, of course, if you have a real-time application, it might drop the performance of your app. But again, if you have a big application, you'll have some structure you'll be following to avoid using hooks only when they're needed, or you remove these hooks actually to the smallest piece component within your page. Okay, so now we are using the use client, so our Next.js knows that this is a client-side component. That's why we'll be allowed to use the use state. Next thing I want to do basically is to create a state for my cart ID. Okay, so as a const cart, and I'll say IDs, and that cart may see lowercase. And then we need also the setter function. So I'll say set cart IDs, make the C now capital, and that will be equal to the use state that I will initialize for now to some hard-coded list to test things. So first ID maybe 1 1, and the second one was also 2 2 2. Great. Now, next thing basically is to get my products based on their IDs. For that, again, for now, will be important that dummy data we created, but at some point you'll change this actually to be very dynamic and coming from API calls. So import product data from product data. Then we'll come right here and filter this. So const cart product, that will be equal to cart IDs dot map. So we'll map through our IDs, and we will say, okay, whenever we have an ID, do the following. Check that my product data dot find, and we'll find by product within my array if my product dot ID is equal to the ID I got from my state. Okay. Good. So now we have our carts product. Now we will go and list them. Now you have a lot of options. For example, you can list the product. You can create another component that will be actually displaying the product, which we will do. For now, what I will do, I'll just keep it generic to test, and then I'll refactor it as well. So first I want to check basically is, do I have any products? Okay, if I don't, then I want to handle that. So I'll create a div. So I would say basically is, do I have a cart product currently? Do I have anything saved in my product? If not, then I'm just displaying a message saying your cart is empty. Okay. Otherwise, I'm just mapping through my products list that I get back. Then I'm mapping through them here, and you can see this is twirly line here. I'll fix it later because it doesn't know the type of my component. Then I'm using basically the link because, of course, if I have an item in my cart, I want to be able to click it and see my item details, right? So I'm making my item clickable, which means I have to import the link component from Next.js link. And then what we are doing, we're just using the ref to take us to product slash the product ID, adding again some classes from Tailwind to style. And then we are adding, displaying the product name, the product price as well. And then we add here a text which we have like a button, but it is actually the whole thing clickable, which shows view details. Okay, so you can click and go and see your details. Now what I will do, I'll create actually another component for this. So I'll go back to my component and I'll create a new component. I'll call it cart item .jsx, and I'll just generate my components. I'll still keep it cart item, and then what I will do, I'll just pass on whole thing to my component, right there, which means that my component expect a property which called product, and then I'll just add the type of my product. So that's the type of React dot functional component which accepts a prop called product, and that product will be of type of iProduct. And actually I made a big mistake. It's not .jsx, it's .tsx. Let me fix that. And now that should be all good. We need to import now this component from here instead of being from cart. So I'll go remove it now from here, and I'll just go add it right there. Good. Now this page looks great. Now let's go and fix our main page. So I'll import my component, which is the cart item. And then I'll just be now rendering my cart item itself, which accepts a property called product. That will be passing on the products I'm reading right here. And don't forget the key, of course. So the key will be equal to my product.id. We close off this. And you can see this one is complaining because still this one doesn't know what it is. I'll say as for I product and import that as well. So that should fix it. Okay. And this one also doesn't know. So I'll just do that if that exists to make sure it doesn't pass undefined or break in that scenario. Good. Now everything looks great. Now let's go back to our UI and test this. So I'll just hard reload. Oh, I need to run my server actually. So let me go back to my terminal and run my app npm run dev. Now, as my UI runs, you can see the /cart, and I can see the list of the items I hard coded, and I can see also the link right there. So if I go and click now my item, it should take me successfully now to the details page. But still our details page doesn't really display much things. So you can feel free to add as many things you want, but I'll just make sure that I'm able to display some basic details on my screen. So I'll go back right here and I'll just extend this, remove that mistake I left there. And what I will do, I'll just use some basic CSS again from time on CSS to display some basic details, okay? And what I will do, I'll just remove this for now. And what we have here basically is we are just displaying the product details. Again, here we just have to make sure that this product, it does exist and it's not undefined. So we just have to do this way, exclamation mark, to make sure really it doesn't crash if that product doesn't exist. I'll remove this on click button for now. And this is what we have. So we got our products earlier, right? And now all what we are doing is just displaying the name, price, also some description, and also we have a button at the moment. So if you go back now our UI, you can see something like this, right? So you can feel free, you can add more things if you want to follow the design we are trying to do, display an image, display more details about your item, and so on. Now, how to be able to go back to the cart? Let's go back to our code. Let's go up and let's import use router from Next Navigation. So make sure you pick up the one from Next Navigation, not Next Router. And then basically we'll go inside our component and we just create an instance router of this router navigation, just like that. So const router equal use router. We can just go back to our button again and add on click function. And that will be equal to an arrow function. And all what we will do is just do a router dot, and there is some functionality called back, which is built in. It will take you back basically to the last route that you're visiting. Now, just be aware that because we are using, oh, actually I can see something's complaining. Let me make sure what I have done wrong. Use router, okay. So that's what I want to mention, because again, we are using hooks and we are using hooks. So use router, it is a hook. So anything starting with use keyword, it is a hook. We need to make our component a client-side component again. But this is usually a not good deal, like I told you. So because only we need this feature for the button itself, we have to make our whole page a client-side component. So usually the best practice is create another component for your button, which will be the client-side component. That will be actually accessing the router, and that will be only the one client-side. But everything on your product page will be still a server-side component. So feel free for this. You can do this refactoring by yourself, and you can go ahead and do it. But for now, I'll just make the whole thing for me a client. All good. Now my build should be working as expected. So let me scroll down, and yes, it is building successfully. Now let's go back to our page and hard reload. And I can see it is complaining about a few things. I think I have to stop my component. And not because we make our page fully client-side components. Now it's complained that we're trying to access the product ID from our parameter, which we can't access directly as it is a promise. We should use React.use, which is the latest React hook that just came out a couple of weeks ago. So let me go back now here. And what I will do, I feel actually it's better to create now a new component only for this. So I will go to components, I'll create a new component. I'll call it button.tsx, and usually this should be like a reusable component, but for now I don't need that. So I'll call it a button navigate back, basically. Okay, so that will be FCE. I'll generate my button. I'll make sure this is a client side, use client. And then I'll just move this work right there. So I'll move this one here to there. Okay, which means I can now remove these from here to inside my new component, and also my import, I can remove it from here to there as well. Okay, now I can just import this button and display it here, and import it, and we close. Now this one should work now perfectly. We can remove the use client from here as well now, and should be all good. Now let's go back to our UI and let's run this. And now there are no errors with our component. If I click back to cart, it's taking me back successfully to my cart, and I can see on my list again, view details, I can see my details, back to cart, it's working as well. Now, before we move on to the next step, let's look at first an error or a warning actually I'm getting on my console. So the first, which is the important one for now, which is it is complaining about the param, the product ID that we're trying to access from our route within our product details. Now, because of the new version of Next.js, it is actually telling us that basically these params should be awaited before using its properties, okay? And if you click this link right here, it will take you to the official website of documentation that explains you what is the problem. So currently we're accessing like this directly our parameters. But it's saying for all these properties right here, you need now to wait for them. And the way to do it is go ahead and install this, but that's if you are using older version of Next.js. But because today's video, I'm using the latest version, I don't need to install anything extra. All what I have to do is just go back to my code and make sure my component, it is an async function. And also I'm awaiting the access for my params properties. Now, there are other ways to do it as well. This one, for example, if it's a server-side component, but if it's client-side component, then you can use the new hook in React 19, which is the React.use hook. Then you can actually, that one by default awaits for any promises or any async calls, and make sure those ones are processed before anything else happens. Now for us, the first option should work fine because our page is still a server-side component. So what I will do is, first thing, I clean up a little bit my layout because I want it to look a little bit closer to my design, so it's more appealing. So I just changed a little bit the design there, which is just layout and CSS using Tywin. And also, if you go back to your code, actually you'll find that actually the console is also throwing an error here as well, which is the same thing we're seeing in our browser too. Now to do that, I'll just go back to my component. I'll make sure now my component, it is an async component. So I'll add async here. Then I'll come here inside my component I'll create const, and I'll say the product ID that I'm accessing here is equal to a weight, and for our params basically. Now we can use this product ID while searching for the values. And that's it, simple as that. Now if I go to my console, I can see it is compiled successfully. And let's go back to our UI. I'll just rerun this, and you can see that error has gone now. Okay, so basically now my component is still working as expected. If I go back to my products page and I click another product, then again I'm seeing my product details successfully as well without that warning. Now let's look at the route which is for pages which are not found. For example, if I try to access a page on slash, for example, test, we get usually a built-in 404 page within Next.js. And you can basically stick to this if you like it, but usually it's good to create your own custom one. So let's go and try that now. So if we go back to our folder, so what I will just close all these things here, close cart, component, product, and prompt. Okay, now if you want really a visual append custom 404 page, we can use our Taiwan CSS, and this page basically will show up whenever a user visits a no existing URL in your Next.js site. Now we can easily do that. We just go to the root for our app, and we'll create a new page right there, and it should be called not dash found .tsx, and you can't name this anything you like. This is how you should call it, because Next.js can pick it up by default to handle the 404 pages. Now inside here, basically you can create your page, and what I will do, I'll paste a basic page here, which doesn't do much, to be honest with you. Always have it just a title 404. I'm using again Taiwan CSS for styling, keeping in mind my colors that I'm using, and I'm saying, oops, this page you are looking for doesn't exist, and then I'm just giving back a button that takes you back to the home page. But of course I don't want to use an anchor tag, because anchor tag will refresh or reload my screen, so I don't want those behaviors usually in your front-end application. So I'll import again the link component from next link and replace the e tag with the link component. Okay, and this one basically will just take you to home page if any page is not found. Okay, now let's go and test this. I'll go back to my UI, and there we go. We can have now better page, brighter. You can do whatever designs you want with this, and it's displaying nicely the message that your page is not found. If we click the button here, it will just take us back basically to the home page, which is now it's empty. We're just displaying a hello message. Now, you may be thinking, now if you access some page within the product details page and using an ID which doesn't exist. So let's test that. So products slash, and I'll put some ID that I don't have. So let's hit enter. And that one basically throw an error. And the reason why is because if you go to this page, that link basically it should work for any number or any string you input. But if you remember, because it is a dynamic route, but if you remember now, we inside our code we're looking for a product with this ID that was trying to access the details, and the first one we're trying to access, it is the image URL, but that product doesn't exist, and that's why we're getting this error. Now there is a better way to handle this. So what I will do, let's go back to our code again and go back to our details page, and we'll import a function which is called not found from next navigation. So basically Next.js make all these things easy for us. So I'll say import not found from next/navigation. Okay, then we will come inside our code here, and before the return we'll run a check. Okay, we'll say if product doesn't exist, then just run this function not found. And this one basically what we'll do, it will just navigate by default the user to the 404 page you created. And because we did this check, now we don't have to add these exclamation marks right here. This should just work fine because I know you already did the check earlier. So more cleaning, and here as well for the price, and there we go. Good. Now let's try this again. So let's go back to our UI and let's run it again. And there we go. I'm trying to access the same route. It's taking me back to 404. Now let's try some route which does exist. So 111, that's one of them. And you can see it is working as expected and displaying for me the actual product details as we're expecting. Now let's move on to the next part, which is the navigation. Until now, if we want to navigate between pages, we have to go manually in our link bar and type manually the route of the pages we want to visit. And that's how it does not work. And usually that's not how it works, right? You need to have a navigation to navigate between pages. Now, I want you to stop the video here and try by yourself. I would like you to create a nav bar, simple one. We don't need all these items we have currently in the screen. Just we need a home button and we need for now the products button as well. Okay, and make sure this components you created, you add it in the way that it should show up in all pages. You don't have to manually add it in the product page and manually add it in product detail page and so on. You just add it in one spot and then it will show up in all pages. And if you follow me from the beginning of this recording, I mentioned that earlier of this recording as well. So you can go just to basically do your layout component and you can create your navbar or header somewhere as a single component, then just import it here and it should show up in all the pages. Now, here's the thing. I want that when you create this navigation bar, I want to see the active links as well. So if you're on home page, the home button should be active. If you're in the products page, I want that button to be active. So stop the video here and go try by yourself and see how you go. Now what I will do, I'll go in the components folder. I'll create a new component called navigation or header.tsx. I will generate my component right here. Okay, now first thing I want to do basically is to add this black background for my UI I'm using at the moment. So I'll use the built-in classes within Tailwind, and this time I'll not just copy and paste the code. I'll type each and everything so you see me how I'm using Tailwind CSS. So class name and the BG, so background's BG, then dash, and then the background color. So if I open my Tailwind CSS config, then actually my black is this one. Okay, so 101010. So I'll use that one and I think to pick it up for me as a default one now. Now next thing is, that's it for my background. Next is to create our header inside. So I will start actually by having two parts. Now if you go back to our design, you can see we have like the logo on the left and we have actual navigation in the middle, and then we have that item on the right there. Okay, so the way we can do it is create one single container that will have three children that will align them together. So let me go back to that. And actually I'll make this one as my home container. So I'll make it flex. And then I'll have three children. So the first one, I'll just keep it an H1 for now, not use actual image for my logo. I'll say my audio shop. And this one will be text white, so class name, so text, and then the color, so I'll just say white for now. And I'll say the text size, so text again, dash 2XL, 2XL. So that is a size. If you hover, you will see that is the font size will be 24 pixels, and that is the line height. So I'm okay with that for now. Next is my next child, and that will be actually the list or the navigation itself. So the way I will do it, again, I will create another container for make it actually a URL list, so it's easy for accessibility users to use my navigation. And then I will have my first item, which will be an li basically. Okay, and this li I will use, for example, that is the home, right? And before I do the home, I need a way to click this item. So I will add actually the link from next/link, right? And the href, which will take me, so that will take me to home, so that will be slash. And then I'll add actually some class names to style my buttons. So if I remember, the text also is white, but I'll use a different one, which is, let's say light gray, this one, okay? So let's use that color. So text, light gray, and see those options are showing up. So we're taking the second one. And also when I hover, I want to change my color to text white. Okay. And then next thing I want to do basically is just to add my text. I'll close my link and I'll say home. Good. Same thing I will do for my other item as well. So I'll say product, and that will take me to /product, and that should be it for now. Okay, then the next thing we have in the end is actually that cart icon. For now I'll just add something like this. I'll just say link as well, and I'll say ref. It takes me to /cart, and I'll not add any icon for now. I'll just say cart. And actually what I will do, I will just do the same styling here for now, but we will change these things later as well. So we do like this /cart, and here I did a mistake. It's a link capital, and let's change that one to link capital as well. Good. Now we make this one as a flex, so these items can be ordered next to each other. Now next I want to do is basically add some extra things to make sure they are horizontally and vertically centered as well. So the way we can do that using flex is very easy. So next to my flex, I'll add a couple of other properties. First one is justify between, and the second one is items center. Good. Then the other thing is for my actual navigation. So I need to add styling for it itself. So class name, that would be also flex. And I'll just add space between them. So space X, I'll just say 4, for example. Or let's say 5. Let's save this and let's run our terminal and see what we have so far. And actually I have to import this navigation in my layout so I can see it in my pages. So I'll go to layout here, import this new component. So import navigation for my component slash navigation, and then we'll just add it here on top of our children. Good. Now let's go check our UI and let's hard reload. And actually before we test this, I just figured out I did a huge mistake. This one should be within another items. So let's go and do this. It just feels like, you know, when you're in interviews and you're screwing it up for some silly things. Here we go. So this one is fixed right here. So hopefully all is ticked. Let's go back to our UI, and there we go. As soon as I come back to my screen, I can see my nav bar. I can see that my logo, for example, is there on the left, my navigation is in the middle, and my cart is on the right. Now I can fix this a little bit more. For example, I will add the class here as container to make sure that it is aligned in the center. You can see like this, but I don't want actually my black background to go also to the middle. So that it needs me basically to add another element inside. So I have to add another div. I'll paste everything inside, and all this styling here except the black background will go down right here. So let's fix that. Let's do this, and there we go. Now it looks much better. Now I want to do a few more things. Just add some padding up and down so it looks a little bit nicer. So let's go back to our code again, and I'll just add here some padding Y, and I'll say, for example, let's say 4. Let's save this, open our UI, and that looks much better now. So now if I click home, it should navigate me back to home, and if I click product, it should navigate me back to the product page. Now one thing still missing for us here is the active status. Now to handle the active link, there are different ways of doing it. One of them is to use the use path name from next/navigation. The other one, you can use also the use router from next/router. Now for both of them, if you heard those words I'm saying, they are both hooks within Next.js, which means you have to make your nav component as client-side component. So either way, we have to make our component client-side. So I will go maybe with the second option and we can test it together. But both of them are valid, except when you go for huge applications, you might have some differences depending on the actual requirements you need. So I will go first and import my use router, which means I have to make my component a client-side component. use client. Okay, the next is create an instance of our router. So I'll go inside my navigation and create that. And then I'll create a constant that can check for me if this current route is active. A type of string, and it does not check for me if my current router dot path name it is equal to the path. And now this function basically will give us back a boolean. Again, if you're using JavaScript, you don't need to add these types interfaces I'm adding right here. Now, next thing we can do basically is to check the routes and check which link we do have active. And to make things, more interesting, more dynamic, what I will do is I'll create actually an array for my routes. So I'll create const route, and that will be of type route that I will create route, and to be an array, and that will be equal to an array of objects with path, and that will be the actual path, and then we will have actually the label, and that will be the name of your button. So I'll call, for example, this one will be home, and then I'll create another one which will be /products, and then this one will be products. This way, if you're adding more routes, you don't have to keep change your navigation inside. We'll create a very generic logic that will work all the time for us. Now I will define this interface of the route. So because I'm using TypeScript, I have to do so. So I'll just do this I here. So we have I route. Now I have my routes. Next thing basically is just my return function basically. So instead of having the list like this, I'll just go and remove these allies from here, but I'll keep them because I'll change things. And then I'm just mapping through my routes, okay, reading the path and the label. Then I'm displaying the link, same what we were doing before, but of course before that I need the ally itself. So I'll just go to here, cut this and add an ally, which is a list. And then we have the link inside, which means this key have to go to the upper level to my list item. And then the link will have the href basically, and also the path href, and then we are passing the label right there. Okay, then the classes of course will be just depend on what you need. For me, the class I said I want to be actually the same for normal, so I'll just say copy, and I'll say okay, this is my basic class. Okay, so the text should be always light gray, the hover should be text white, but if it is active, then actually the text will be the color I have, which is orange. So text will be primary, primary, which is the orangey color. And this one I don't need anything here basically because I'm handling the first condition. Now what will happen, this one will add up this one after it. So the best way to handle this is basically remove also all these things here, and the other one will be in the else statement. So if my path is active, this is my color, otherwise this is my color, and this is the hover. And the hover also, I'll add here another hover. And basically I will use the same text primary color with a shaded dark one. And to use a different shade, I will just say it is basically text primary, but I will add some shade to it. I will say, for example, actually not, I'll say text dot slash, so I'll say text dash opacity, and I'll say, for example, 80% only. Okay, so that's when I hover. Now let's go and test all these changes, but before that, let me remove these from here. And also one thing I remembered, which is very crucial when you are working with accessibility, is that this is basically a navigation. So this one should be a nav element and not just a div element. So let me fix that too. So from UI perspective, it doesn't have any impact. But from accessibility side, it does have a major impact on the user. So we have to be careful with the semantic HTML. So I'm adding that. Now I'm getting here some problems in my compiler. And now it's working as expected. So let's go back to our UI. This should mainly happen because the layouts in Next.js are rendered before the page content itself. And sometimes the router is not fully initialized when accessed in a layout component. So the next router we are using at the moment becomes available only when the page content is rendered, which can lead to this kind of errors. Now, there are many possible solutions for this. We can move the use router logic to a page component, which will not work for us. The other one is to check for router availability in the layout, which means we have to add a lot of custom logic in our layout component itself to make sure that our page is mounted before we render our navigation. Then we have other alternative, which let's try it, which is to use another hook, which is the use path name. So let's go and try that as well and see how we go with it. So we say use path name. So let's import the other one. So import use path name from next/navigation this time. So it's not slash route. And then we will go inside our app. Instead of this, we'll actually create an instance of the path name. So just like this, so const path name will be equal to use path name. And now instead of doing this, we'll just say the path name. Simple as that, okay? Now, I can see that my build again, it is running, and let's see if this one will work. It is compiled successfully. So finger crossed, let's try, go and see how we can do this. Let's now try to run this. Now it says invalid link with a child. So I think I did a mistake somewhere here, forgetting something. So we should not have this a links right here. So let me remove all this. So let me clean up all this. I'll remove this class name basically to my link itself. I don't need the pass ref at all. And we remove the a tag from here. Now let's save this. Let's try again. And there we go. Our UI looks much better now. We are in the products page and we can see that the product nav item, it is there highlighted. And when I hover, you can see the color changes. If you go and click home, it takes us back to the home and we can see the home button there. It is highlighted as well for us. So our app is getting in shape, and congratulations to everyone who made it so far and they were able to create the navigation by themselves as well. Now, as we start looking at the backend side in the Next.js, let's talk about first route handlers in Next.js. They may sound very fancy, but trust me, they are super simple once you get the hang of it. Now, what are route handlers? Now, imagine this. You are building a website and you need a way to handle things like submitting a form, fetching data, or even adding new users to your application. Now, route handlers are basically like your app's personal assistant for the backend. They handle requests like, hey, can you save this data? Oh, yo, I need some information from the database. Now, in Next.js, these route handlers live in the app folder, and beneath it, you'll create an API folder. So it will be app/API folder. Now, each file in this folder is like a mini server that handles requests for you. So, why are they amazing then? First thing, you don't need a separate backend. You don't have to set up a separate Express or Node.js server. It is all built into Next.js. The second, serverless by default. These route handlers only run when needed, so you are not wasting resources, which is very efficient, right? Then the third is that it is very super easy to use. They work out of the box with just a bit of JavaScript or TypeScript. Now, how do we create these route handlers? All right, here is how it works step by step. First thing, we'll go inside our app folder, a directory, and we'll create a new folder called API. And you have to use this name. You can't use any other name. So API. So what we'll do is, as we create our API folder, now think of this as the place where all your backend magic will be happening, okay? So inside now here, we'll create a new file, just one example for at the moment, and we'll call it, let's create another folder. I'll call it hello. And then inside that folder, I'll create a file. I'll call it route.js. And basically, same thing if you remember we did for the page routing. It is same thing works for the backend. So this API, basically, the way to be accessed is will be /API/hello. Okay, so and the route.js, that name you can't change. It's like the page.tsx we created earlier as well. So that's how it knows that this folder it is for an API. So route.js is not a name you can change. That is where your API logic will be living. Create export async function. I'll call it get for now, and we'll have a parameter called request. And for now, we'll just return new promise or new response actually. And I'll say hello world. Great. So now this get this is the type of the HTTP get, like saying I need some data, for example, and the response you are just sending back basically a response with a message saying hello world when someone hit this endpoint. Now, time to go and test this. We run again our server, and as we see our app running, go back to our browser and let's hit the new point. So localhost 3000, and we set it to be /API/hello. Hit enter. And there we go. We can see now the response printing in our browser. And see how easy is this. And this is basically your route handler in action. Now it's time to create the get endpoint to fetch the list of the products as that we were hard coding them earlier. And don't worry, this is super simple and I'll walk you through it again step by step. Now, first is again, what is this get endpoint? So get endpoint is like a waiter in a restaurant. You, which you are the client, ask for something like the menu, and the waiter, who is the backend, bring it to you. Now, in this case, our menu is this list of products. Now, this get endpoint will grab a list of products from our database or a data file, then send that list to anyone who requests it. Now, let's go and get this done. So let's go back to our folder and go inside your API folder we created earlier. Then we will create a new folder that we called products. So products. And inside our products, we'll create a new file that we'll call route.js or .ts. So we just stick to TypeScript. Okay. Now, if you remember, as I explained earlier, as you use for the page routing, you create the folder name, then page.tsx. For the API endpoint, you create your folder name, then beneath it, you create the route.ts. And route, basically, that's how it knows that's where your API is, and the folder name above it is your API endpoint. So this one will be, for example, /API/product, and we'll get this route.ts to get us the list of our product. Now let's add some code to our route. First thing is import next response from next server. So import next response from next server. And basically this one brings in the Next.js helper for sending responses. So think of it as the tool that packages this data and send it back to the client. Next thing is to import the dummy data created earlier. We will be using database in later of this lesson, but for now we just use the dummy data, so keep these things very simple and take it step by step. So import our products data from product data for now. The next thing basically is define our function. So this will be actually a get call. So we'll do export async function, and this is a get function because we want to get the list of the product. And then our code will just go right inside. Now, basically, this is for creating a function that runs whenever someone makes a request call to /API/product. Now, next thing basically is to return a response. But before we do that, we have to do a small tweak to our product data because we can't send it just like that as a JSON. We have to transform it. Why is Next.js can't send plain JavaScript objects? So we need to convert this product data into a string using JSON.stringify. So the way to do that is very simple. We create a new variable, I'll call JSON response, and that will be equal to JSON dot stringify, and then we pass on our products data that we imported. Easy. Next thing is to return our response, return new next response, and we'll pass on our data, which is JSON response that we formatted. And the next thing is to pass on some properties. The first one to be, for example, the status. So I want the status of my response to be 200. The next thing is the headers. Pass on the headers with a property called content type, and we'll set it to application/JSON. This basically will tell the client that, hey, this is a data in a JSON format. Okay, and this one I have to put it within as a string as well. Good. Now our API is ready, the endpoint is ready. You can see it's very simple and straightforward. Next thing is to test it. So we have two ways to test this. We can either test it on the browser, as I did earlier, or we can use Postman to test this. Now let's do both actually, so you can see how this one works. So I will go and run first my application. So npm run dev. And meanwhile this is running, I'll open Postman. Now, if you're not familiar with Postman, just go ahead and visit the official website. And it is very simple and easy to install on your machine. And it can work on Linux, on Mac, and also on Windows as well. And this is really simple and easy to follow steps. You can just hit download and install it, or even they have a web version, so you don't have to install, you can just run the web version. Now, why Postman? Postman basically, it helps you to test your APIs without the need of the UI side of the application, which is really powerful and very helpful. Now, I'll show you how to test on both for us because our API is built using Next.js, so we have also the ability to test it in the browser. So for now, let's start with this. So I'll create a new tab, and we'll be using the local host port 3000 /API/products. So that is the route we created, and it will be a get call. So let's hit send, and it is running down here, sending the request. And you can see it came back with 200 response back, request is successful, and we can see the list of the data we are getting back successfully, okay? Which means our API is working great as expected. I can do the same thing. I can just go back to my browser and I'll do /API/product, hit enter, and I can see the list of my data successfully on my screen. Now we are going to build a get product details endpoint using the route parameters. Now this feature will allow us to fetch individual product details dynamically, which is really super handy for any e-commerce application. Now let's dive into this. First thing you might be wondering is, what is this route parameter? Lucky for us, because we're using Next.js, we did the same thing as in the front-end side, which is using the params for our pages to access actually a product and create a dynamic page. It is also the same thing for our backend. So what we want is, we want to have, for example, an endpoint, which will be /product/ some random ID to get us the details for that product with that ID. So how we can do this, again, it is also very simple and very easy. So we'll go to our project, and inside our product folder, we'll do the same thing as we did for our actual product, where we created a subroute with this thing. We'll have the ID within this brackets right here. We'll do the same thing for the backend as well. So we'll go inside our product under API folder and create a new folder with the same name of the parameter if you want to, or you can use different one. So I'll keep them same. I'll just say product ID. And then inside this folder, I'll create my new route, which is route.ts. Now inside here, all our logic will just go here to get the actual product details. Now first thing we need is to import the next request from next server, which helps to handle incoming requests. So we'll go and import that. So import next request from next server. Next thing is to import the data, the dummy data we created. But again, like I said, later we'll change this to actually import these details from a database. So import the product data from our data. Next thing basic is to find the get function for this endpoint. This will be also a get call. So export async function, and it will be a get call function. And it will take in basically two parameters. The first one is the request, okay, which will be of type next request. And the second one will be the actual parameter we'll be accessing from our URL. So same basically what we have done for the front end page applications. So the second one will be an object which have params. And these params, we have to define the type again, same thing we did for the request, because I'm using TypeScript. But again, if you're using JavaScript, you don't need to add these types to our parameters or our arguments. Now, my params will be of a type, an object, which takes in the product ID, and that product ID will be of type string. Good. So our type now is defined for our arguments within our function. Next thing basically is to find the product by its ID, right? So first thing I want to access the product ID. So I'll say const ID, and that should be equal to params dot product ID. The next is same what we did in the front end side. For now, we will be mapping to our product list and retrieving back the actual product with this ID. So as a const product, that will be equal to my product data dot find, and for each product, check if the product dot ID it is equal to the ID I'm retrieving from my parameter. Now, when we search for product, we have to handle the scenarios as well if the product is not found, right? So if my product not found, so if product doesn't exist, then we'll return a response, so new response. But what we'll do actually will follow the same way we did here, so next response. So I'll import that as well in my project. So let's go here. I'll say next, but because these ones are the same, so I'll just copy this and move it to the above lane as well. So I'll say I'm returning basically same thing we did here. Return the new next response, so return new next response, and then we pass on basically a message because we're not sending any data back. We just send a message, say product not found. Okay, and then I'll send also a status, but a status of 404, which is it's a standard status for anything which is not found. Now let's say that we find our project. Now we want to send basically the product details within our response. So we say return new next response, and we'll pass on our data. And if you remember, we can't just pass on this JSON just like that. We have to actually stringify it. So JSON.stringify, and then pass on the product to that. And next thing is basically to pass on an object with a status of 200, and also the headers. And basically in this headers, we just tell what kind of data we are sending. So same thing we did earlier. So we will say it just content type, it is a JSON type response we are sending back. Good. So basically this is our API endpoint. It is very simple and straightforward for now. Next thing I want to do basically is to go and test this. Again, we can use Postman or the browser, and let's actually use both of them. So I'll go back to my Postman and make sure actually your app is running. I think mine is still running. Let me open it up. Yes, it is running. I'll go open up Postman, and here I'll just create actually a new page. So I'll say localhost, but instead of /product will be /product/ and let's pass on ID which exists and let's send the request. And there we go, we got a 200 response back with the details of the product in our data. So, which means the positive scenario is working. Now let's test a scenario which a product doesn't exist. So I'll just pass on some random number right there. Let's click send. And there we go, we got actually an error response with a 404 not found, and we got our message back, which is product not found. So our API basically is working easily as expected. You can also test in your browser. So here we have slash product, we'll do slash 111, which does exist. I'm getting my product details back. If I pass on some random number here, I should get here a product not found. And actually, if I go inspect, go to my network, I'll just redo it again. You can see here that is my call I'm sending, and that is a get call, but I'm getting a 404 response back as not found. So basically, this endpoint now is the backbone of our product details. It will ensure that the front end always gets the right product data from the backend dynamically. And that is it. You have now just mastered how to create a dynamic get product details endpoint using route parameter. Next, we'll use this actually later to connect the data to our product details page. So stay tuned and keep coding. Before we move forward, there's again another problem with our API endpoint. So if you didn't miss any part of this course, you'll remember that when we try to access actually the dynamic product details pages, we had to fix something with the params, and we have to wait for them before they come. Same thing we have to do for our backend as well. So if I go actually and access an actual product, and let that one load details successfully. But if I go and check my console, you can see that my console is actually complaining again. Okay, so make sure actually when you're developing, anytime you are developing any code, keep eye on your both consoles. And if you see an error, don't just skip it just because it doesn't create any issues for you, because at some point it will do that. And trust me, you don't want that to happen in production. Now, my code basically, or my terminal, is complaining that we use the params.product ID, and params should be also awaited before using its props. To do that, just check out the documentation. So I'll open up my documentation, and good thing for Next.js, everything is always up to date. So same thing we did actually for our front end, we have to go and do the same thing for our backend. And lucky for us, again, all what we have to do is just add a wait in front of our params. Okay, so let's go do that and fix this. So I'll go to my code, and here where I'm trying to access that product ID, I'll just add an await. And let's save this, and our function is already a sync function. Now what I will do, I will go and try to access again my product details and see if that will trigger anything in my console. And you can see it runs successfully without any new issues. Let's dive into shopping cart magic. Yes, it is time to conjure up a backend endpoint that can handle a user's cart without turning into a monster spaghetti code. So this endpoint will serve personalized carts for users. So imagine you have, for example, user one adding a unicorn pull sheet to their cart, while user two casually adding, I don't know, a metal sword. So we don't judge here, right? Now, we have to wind up this, and let's get into the code. First thing we need to make an endpoint should be in this format of /API/user/user ID and then the cart. It look a very long path, but hey, don't scream, I know what I'm doing here. So let's structure this. So basically we'll create a users folder first. So inside our API folder, I'll create a users folder. Okay, and inside our users folder, I'll create another folder which holds the ID of the users. So the brackets and then user ID. Okay, and inside this folder, basically, which will be a dynamic route, we will create another folder which is for cart. So create another folder which is for cart. Then inside this folder, finally, we are going to create our route.ts. So route.ts. Why this is set up? First thing is because having this user ID in the path will allow us to handle cards for multiple users. So if you want to grow your app on the side hustle, after this course, you can do that easily. So for example, the user 1 and user 2 or user 100, they can be covered easily. Let's bring in the ingredients to make this work. First thing basically we need is a user ID from the param. And for that, we'll create a fake database that will use a simple object because of prototyping and some TypeScript types because they are typeset. To do basically is to create, we need a cart handler. And for that, we need a user ID from the params. We need some fake database to start with. We will store these users IDs and also some type interfaces because we are using TypeScript. Now to do that, let's first create a dummy card using a variable cons. We call it cards, and that will be equal to an array, not actually an object. And that object will basically have the key, which is the ID of the user, and the value will be an array of the items that has been added for that user. So we just hard code this a little bit. So I'll say user 1 with ID 1. In his cart, he only have a product with ID 111. Then we will have, for example, a user 2, which have in his cart 2 items. Oopsie. 2 items. The first one ID 222. The second one is with ID of 333, which are actually property items we have in our dummy data for now. Now, because I create now this constant, this variable, I need basically to add some type for it because I'm using TypeScript. So my code will know what is expecting from this constant or this variable. To do that, I'll just create a quick type, which I'll paste it right here. I'll call it shopping cart, and I'll just add I in beginning because it helps me to know which ones are just types and interfaces and which ones are complex and so on. So I just prefer to do this. So it is a record type which takes in string as a first element, and the second one it is an array of strings. Okay, so I can just go and add this as a type of my cards. Basically now this card object maps users IDs to arrays of product IDs. So think of it as our bootleg database. Okay, now next thing basically is to create the get endpoint. Now let's go and start doing that, and before I do that, I'll do same for others. I'll just import the next response and also product details because we need them at some point. Next is let's create our get endpoint. So export async function, and that will be a get call which takes in a request, and that will be of type. So that will be of type next request. Then the second one will be actually the params again, so we can access the user ID. So params, and that params will be of type. So params will be of type object of user ID, which is of type string. Good. So basically our function takes in 2 arguments, the request and the params that access for us dynamically from our routes. Now next thing we want to do basically is just store our user ID. So const, I'll say user ID. If you remember to use await params dot user ID. Good. Next thing basically to check if the user exists in our cart object. So we'll do the following. So const product IDs. Oops. That will be equal to cards. And we try to access basically the IDs using the user ID. So user ID. Now, after this, before we do anything, we have to make sure we do have a product IDs, right? If we don't, that means we don't have anything currently in the cart for that specific user. So we have to handle that. So we say if we don't have product IDs, then we'll just throw basically or return a new next response with a message, but we'll not actually system send message. We'll send an empty array. And reason why is, for example, when you visit a cart when you're shopping online and you don't have elements, you don't want to see an error coming up there, right? You just see, for example, a message saying no items in the cart, right? So I will do the same way. So I'll be basically sending an empty array. So I'll say JSON.stringify, and I'll pass on an empty array in my response. And the next thing basically will be an object with a status, which I'll still send 200 in this case, and also the headers as we did before. We should pass on basically what type of content we are sending. So the content type will be a JSON object. We have the product IDs exist. Next is basically to get the details of those products using their product IDs. So with a cons, now say cart products. So not only IDs, there will be products, and that will be equal to the product IDs that we got. And what we will do is map through them. And when you map, you'll get ID for each product. Then what we'll do, we'll check if my product data dot find, and we'll try to find basically the product. And if the product dot ID is equal to the ID we are checking now. Good. Now after this, all what we have to do is give back a response. So not cons, return. So return a new next response. Oops, not request, response. And the first one, of course, sending actually your data. So make sure you stringify it as always. So JSON.stringify, and then we'll pass on our cart product. And then the next argument will be an object with a status of 200. And we are sending also the headers as we did earlier as well. So I'll just copy this one and paste it right there. Now time to go and test this. So let's go to our terminal and let's run our app. So npm run dev and let this one run. There we go. Now I'll go to my Postman, and what I'll do, create a new one, and I'll say localhost. And for now, for example, what I will do, I'll say slash, and not slash product, so it'll be slash users slash, and let's test the positive one, so I have a user one. Okay, then slash cart. Now let's click send. And there we go, we successfully got a 200 response back with the actual details coming back for that product. Now let's test the second user we have, which is user with ID 2. And if you remember, it had 2 products in its cart, and it's giving me exactly the full details of my product with an array response. Now time to test the negative flow, which means that we don't have actually a user. So it's 666, and let's click send. And there we go, we got back actually a 200 response back with an empty array object, because first in the user doesn't exist, and if it exists, even we don't have actually items for that user. Now the users can see actually their cards. It's time to let them add items. So stay tuned, because in the next part, we will turn a magical shopping cart saga. Until then, happy coding, and remember, code clean, code strong. Now we have set up an endpoint that can send back the shopping cart for any user ID. But let's make this a bit more realistic by adding functionality to allow users to modify their cart, specifically by adding or removing items. We will start with adding items to our cart. So approach here, we'll be reusing the same path we used earlier. So /api/user, user ID, then /cart, but with a different HTTP method. Since we are modifying data, adding an item to the cart will be using the post method instead of the get method. Now how we can implement that, we can just go ahead and define a new function. So export async function, and this will be a post call function. Okay, and you text in the request, which will be of type same as we did earlier, next request. Oops. And then the second parameter will be our object, which to accept the params as a field. And that params, same as we did earlier, it will be of type object. that takes in, same thing we did here, the user ID as a string. So user ID, and that's type of string. Great. Now, next thing basically is to extract the user ID as we did earlier. So const, I'll just say ID is equal to await params dot student dot user ID. And the next thing basically is to access the body request. And this is a post call, right? So we'll be sending some data with our request. And the way to access it is using the request which is coming as a first parameter of our post call. So the const, I'll say body, and that will be equal to await. So you have to await for it, the request.json. Okay, so here basically we just parse the request body. Okay, next thing basically we want to do is extract the details. For example, to save a new item in a cart, we need the user ID, which we are getting from our param. And the next thing we need is the actual product ID you want to add to the cart. So let's access that from our body request. That will be product ID, and that will be equal to the body. So we'll be extracting this from the body, because the body we access in lane 41, that will be an object. Okay, so he's basically extract the product ID from the request body. Great. Now you have the main details. Now let's talk about this request body, which allows clients basically to send data to the server. This is where the client specifies the product they want to add to their cart. To show you this, I can open up Postman, and I'll just bring it to my screen. And remember we get goal. Now we create a post goal. So I'll go select post, and then you can go and select body here and select row, and make sure you have JSON selected. And basically here is the data you'll be sending with your request. And for example, from the front end later, we'll be calling this API and we'll be passing the product ID basically. Oops, product ID. And let's say the ID is, for example, 444 of our item. And here this should be double quote, because Postman doesn't allow single ones. Okay, so this is how our body request will be looking like when we send or we trigger our call from our front end. And this is the product ID that we are accessing right here. Okay, now next I want to do, because I'm using TypeScript, I need to add a type for my body, so my app will know what data or fields or things I'm expecting within this body. So what I will do, I'll just create here a type. So a cart body, and that will be equal to, I'll say product ID, and that will be of type string. Okay, and then I'll just pass this type here to my body. Now next is we will add the product to the user's cart. Since our cart implementation use in-memory data here, which is hard-coded in our project, we need to handle the scenarios where the user doesn't already have a cart. Again, one note here is when you refresh your screen or you restart your server, you lose the new data that will be actually adding using the APIs. But that will fix later when we use actual database. Okay. Now, let's go and basically handle the scenarios where the user doesn't already have a cart. So I'll go back to my code, and I will say if the cart we have at the moment with current user ID, so I just say it's ID, right? If that one doesn't exist, okay, let's say our ID, for example, is 5,000, and there is no user ID here with 5,000, so we have to handle that. So if we don't have current user in our cart, then we will just initialize our cart basically to an empty array. So I'll say cart at my current user ID is equal to an empty array. Is push basically the product ID to the user ID key. So with the cart at ID, it is equal, or push basically the product ID that we extracted. So just by adding basically the new product to the user cart itself. Now, as a reminder, again, this is an in-memory approach, means any changes will be lost when the server restarts later. We'll replace this with a proper database for persistence. Now, finally, basically, you will send back the updated card as a response. So the way we can do that is I'll create a new constant. I'll call it updated card, and that will be equal to card add ID of the current user, and that should be cards dot map or map the actual IDs. And what we will do is return basically the product ID. We should pass on the ID and the quantity, and that will be equal to 1. What we are doing basically just build up the response that we'll be sending. Of course, you don't want to send to a specific user the details of the cart of another users, right? So we are actually only returning the current user ID and map through the actual product IDs and give back a proper object with a product ID, passing on the ID and also the quantity of each product. So we just hard coding that for now. We set it into 1. Now, next thing basically is to return the response. So return new next response. And the first we'll pass in is basically the updated card, of course. So we'll just make sure we are stringifying this. So JSON.stringify, and we'll say updated card. And then the next thing is basically an object with a status of 201. And of course the headers where we tell what type of content we are sending, which should be same thing as this one. So I'll just copy this one and paste it right there. Great. Now let's go and test this basically in Postman. So I'll go back, open up my Postman, and I have here my post call. And let's say, for example, I'm adding the user that doesn't exist, right? So I will go and create a post call using a user that I don't have already, and I'm passing a product ID with 4. We'll go and click send. And actually I got a problem, I think because my server is not running. Let me go and run my server npm run dev. My server is running. Let's go and try this again. I'll click send. And there you go. You can see I got 201 response coming back created with the product ID and the quantity itself. Now let's test this and see if we actually have that user added as well, because we don't have it, right? So I'll create a new page with a get call to the cart, but with the new user, which was, if I remember, 4 sixes. So let me add that user ID 1 2 3 4, and let me go try this. And there we go. My user was created, was added, and I can see also the item I had added it to my cart using the previous call. And that is it. You have successfully basically created a simple add to cart endpoint that lets user modify their shopping cart. My fabulous developers friends, now let's dive into deleting things from our cart like pros. So imagine your cart now is full of goodies, but now you regret adding that overpriced avocado slice, for example. So time to remove it, and let's see how we can do this. Next thing is basically we need a function to handle this delete request. Now, I highly recommend you, as a practice, feel free to stop the video here and have a think about it and maybe try by yourself and see how you go. Okay, now back to it. First things first is we need a function to handle delete requests. So think of it as a digital eraser for your cart. Okay, and here how we can name our fancy function. I'll go ahead and close up my terminal. So again, I'll be in the same route I'm using for getting and also posting call. So same there, I'll add my new function. So say export async function, but now it will be delete. Simple as that, okay, all in capitals, which will take in basically the request, and that will be of type next request. Again, that's this because I'm using TypeScript, and we'll accept also the params. And these params, again, I have to do the typing for it as well as I did before. So I'll just actually copy the whole thing from here and add it right there. Good. So basically our function takes in two arguments. The first one is a request, and second one is an object which have a params as a key that we'll be using to access our user ID from our routes. Good. Now this delete function is screaming, hey, I'm here to delete something, and basically the request tell us what to delete, and the params help us figure out who is deleting, which is the user ID for us, of course. Now, we need to grab some details, okay, and we need to do some detective work. And first thing is basically to check the user ID to know who we are deleting, right? So I'll say const, I'll say user ID, and that will be equal to await. I will X from the params dot user ID. Good. Now we know who is deleting. Now next thing to know what is being deleted. So we have to pick in our request body to find out as we did earlier. So I say const again body is equal to await, and we would awaiting for the request dot JS. And same thing we did before as well. I use the same type I used earlier because they are of same type. And I'll pass it as a type of my body. Again, if you're using JavaScript, you don't need to do this. You can skip this part. Now, next thing is actually finding our product, of course. So const as a product ID that will be equal to my body dot product ID. Okay, so you have feel free either to write it this way or to write it where I did it before. Also write it this way, okay? It have the same meaning, okay? So this time we'll keep it this way. So product ID is equal to the body dot product ID. And now we have got the user, we have got the product. Now let's do the actual deleting magic. So we need basically filter out this. Your cart is just a big old array. So to remove something, we use a filter function like a sieve that keeps everything except for the N1 items. So how we can do that? So we can use cards. I would say for the user, we are checking now. So the card at this user ID, that will be equal to, and I will do like this. I will say cards add user ID or an empty array. And that's for a reason why I'm doing this is to handle the scenario when we don't have actually current user ID within our card. Okay, so then dot filter, and then what we'll do, current product ID, check if this product ID it is different than the product ID we got from our body request. So basically we are just filtering our current array using this product ID. If there is any product with this current product ID, just remove it and don't keep it part of my array. So that's what it is doing. Simple as that. Now again, a translation for this. So if the card exists, keep only the products that don't match the one we are removing. If the card doesn't exist yet, just start with an empty array because you can't delete from nothing, right? So we just handle that scenario so our code doesn't break. Now, when the item is gone, we need to give the user a thumbs up response. And here is how we say, item deleted, you are good to go. So we'll return a new next response, and we'll pass on actually the current card updated. So JSON stringify, and I'll pass on the card for my current user ID, and then we'll pass on an object with a status of 202, which is good status, and then headers, we're just saying the type of the request we are sending. Again, it is a JSON content. So I'll just copy again, same thing, this one, and we'll pass it here. Good. Now the 202 status code means you got it, your delete request was successful, my friends. So this is how you do it when you're using delete. You don't use a 200 response, but you use 202 response. Now The fun part, we should be testing our delete endpoint. So I'll make sure again my server is running. So just go back to my terminal, npm run dev. And while it's running, what I will do actually, I'll take an example here of some item we have and I'll go and delete it. So the user is 2 and actually remove the item 222. Good. Now let's go open up our Postman. I'll create a new tab and inside here it will be actually delete. And I'll point off of one of these and I'll be using actually user 2. Okay. And I will go to the body, select the row, and I have to add my product ID here. So product ID. And we said we will remove the product with the ID of 222. Good. Now let's test this. Send. And you can see I got on 202 requests accepted, and I can see that I got back my card for my current user, but only with one item. Okay. And if you go back to our code, you can see that we had 2, we removed 1, and basically which means we're only left with 1 item at the moment. Okay. Now if I go and remove also the second one, I should now get an empty array back. So I'll go and say send. And there we go. Now we have our both items being removed from our cart. That's it, folks. Now you have got a sleek functional delete endpoint to manage your cards like a pro. Now it is time to set up our actual database instead of hard coding one within our application, which help us to have a database that persists our data even if we close our application and run it again or restart the browser. We'll be using for today MongoDB, and to do that we'll start by actually finding MongoDB Atlas. Go ahead and click that. It will take you to this home page. Feel free to create a free account using your actual Google account, or you can sign up just using an email and password. After you sign up, you'll be land on this screen here, which will be your dashboard, and we'll go and create a new project. So just go to the project 0 here and create a new project. And actually here I have to log in again. So as I'm logged in again, you can give your project a name, okay? And this should be a unique one. So I'll just call it my, for example, first app, for example. You can call this anything you like. And then you can add text if you want, but I won't do that. So just click next. And then it can here show you that you can add basically members to this project. But for now, I'm not adding any members. I'm just having my own, which is the project owner. I'll say create project. Okay, once that one is done, it will be taking you basically to your dashboard page again, and you can see that your current project is right there selected, first app or whatever you name it. Then we will go ahead and create a cluster, okay? So we will go and create one. And you can name anything you like. And here, first thing, of course, is to select the plan. And for us, we'll be just using the free version, of course, which have a limited storage, but it is very enough for us when you are working on the side project. So I'll select that, of course, free one. And I'll say automate security setup checked. Preload sample data that I will uncheck, and then you can give here a name that you like, and I'll keep it cluster 0. Then here you can select your provider. I'll just keep it AWS, and then the region, basically you should be selecting whatever closer region to yourself. I'm based in Australia, so it's auto select for me Sydney by default, so I'll keep that one. Then I'll go and say create deployment. Once that one is done, you'll be given a username and password. So make sure to copy this one and save it somewhere, because we need later to set up our actual project in Next.js. Okay, when you copy this and save it somewhere for later, we'll go and say create database user. And then after that, will ask us to choose a connection method. So go and select that. And then here you'll be given a lot of options, but for today's tutorial, we'll be going to the first one which is drivers option. And basically this will be able to access our Mango's drivers using our Node.js application, which is for us our Next.js. So we're going to do that. Then he will be given a set of instructions that we'll be actually following to add this database to our project. And you can see it is using the driver Node.js, and the version supported 6.7 or later. And that is the amazing thing when you're working with Node.js. Most of the versions are supported, even the older ones. So even new ones comes in, your project will be still working as expected. And you can see the first thing I need to do now is to go and install MongoDB in my project. So just copy this command line here, go back to my project. Okay, I'll just close off this and make sure you're on your project and just paste that command line, which is npm install MongoDB, and go and hit enter. And that should install MongoDB on your project. And next thing I want to do basically now is to go and create a util function that will help me to create a connection between my application and MongoDB. And to do that, we'll create a util function that will be able to be very useful for us to use through our application without to hard code the same code everywhere. So let's go back again to our application, and inside my source folder, create a new folder, I'll call it utils. And actually, I have to move these utils inside my app folder. So let's remove that. Great. Now I'll go back to my browser, and you can see here beneath install your driver, you'll have a third step. And that third step basically is to set up your connection string into your application code. So you have two options, either to show the password or view full code sample. So I'll pick up this option, and all what I have to do is just copy this whole code right here and add it to a file that I'll create in my util. I'll create a new file called db.ts, and then I'll just paste on this code that I copied. And you'll see here the top lane, which I will be hiding, it have actually username and the password as well that help connecting to your database. And that is your connection string. So that will make sure you never share it with anyone, okay? Now for our application, we don't use the require syntax. We use the import and export. So I'll say import, and I'll say here from, and just remove this from here. And as you might know already, that is not really good practice to keep this sensitive data within your actual files. So usually you have to place them in an EF file, which is for configuration. So I'll go ahead in my root of the project, and I'll create a new EF file. And inside there, basically, I will have a couple of constants. First one, I will say db user name. That will be equal to, and I'll bring the value from here and just paste it right there. And same thing, I'll say db password, oops, should be all capital, db password. And that will be equal to the password also, so I'll bring from right there. Then I'll save this and go back here. And instead of having a string like this, I'll use the backticks so I can have variables concatenating with strings. So I'll do like this, then paste that. Then I can do here, for example, process, to go back. So $, curly bracket, then process dot env dot. And the second one will be the actual password, so $, curly bracket, and then process dot env dot db password. Great. Now that's all out of the way. So basically, it's just create a client that will help us to connect to our database using that URI, which is defined above. And what I will do is just clean up all the code here because we don't need all this stuff. All what we need is just an ability to connect and close our database, okay? And what I will do, I'll wrap actually all this within a function. So I'll say const async function, and that should be called, for example, connect to MongoDB. Okay, and that will be a function, and I'll paste everything else inside. And what I will do, this function I don't need right here. Actually, it's async. I should remove it out of here and place it right there because I used the arrow function. So basically now I have a function which does all that work for me. It connects my application to my database using the Mongo client and using the URI I defined above, using my actual username and password. Now what I will do is just export this function so I can access it from my application. And actually I'll move also that URI and place it inside my function as well. Now, next thing I want to do basically is to have a way where we can add data to our database and also play around it easily. So feel free not to, if you're using Visual Studio Code, that's how you're going to do. You open your extension bar and search for MongoDB for VS Code. As soon as you do that, that will be the first option coming up here with a tag of MongoDB. So go ahead and install that. And while it's installing, you can feel free just to go ahead and read a little bit here about how this one works. Basically, this one will be like our playground within Visual Studio Code that can help us to connect our database. So you can feel free to go and click connect or Control Shift P so you can get the command palette. So I'll do that. So Control Shift P, and that will open this bar for me on the top. Okay, so in there basically we can search for MongoDB connection string. So we want to connect using the connection string, and then to come up with this bar on the top where you can paste that connection string. And it is the same one we paste within our util file. So I'll just go back to my UI. Actually, I still have that connection string right there. So I'll just copy it and paste it in my bar up there. So hit enter. And then you can see here down it says MongoDB connection was successful. And I can see here this green button say we are connected to that cluster 0 that we create. Now next, basically we use the same command line again. So Control Shift P. So Control Shift P. And that will open that bar for me. But this time I will search for MongoDB, and I want actually the MongoDB playground. So I want to create a playground. So I'll click that. As soon as I do that, it will create for me a file that I can use as a template to create my actual database. Okay. Now what I will do, I will change first this one here. And that one basically can call anything you like. I'll call it, for example, my audio shop. And then here in the collection, these are the templates. I'll change that. So I'm creating actually products. So I'll create products collection. And inside here, what I will do, I'll just open up that dummy data we had before, and I'll add it right there. So this is my data, and I'll just copy this whole objects from here. Let me copy all that. And then I will go ahead and just paste it right here. Great. Now next thing I need to correct is this one need to be actually on the, like as a strings. They can't be just like that as names. So I'll go and fix that. After fixing all these, oh, actually have here some IDs left. Let me fix those too. So I'll just do this way. Oh, great. Now my data is ready. I'll just go ahead and remove all this code here. I don't need that. Next thing, basically, I want to make sure I'm getting this data back actually in insert. So I'll just come here and say console.log db.collection or get collection. Then you pass on the collection name, which is products. We say product, so that is the collection I want to get. And then what I will say is find. And to that find function, I'll pass an empty object, which means I want to get all the data I have in my products collection. Now, next thing we want to do is basically run this and make sure it's saved in our database. So I'll just go ahead and click this run all selections from the playground, and it will say, are you sure you want to run this? I'll say yes. And this is running, and you can see that I got my console right down here, which is great. That means my data is actually saved in my database, and I'll get to view the logs as well in my output terminal as well. Now, next thing I want to do, first I'll close this here, and what I want to do now, I'll just comment all this because I don't need it anymore. Or actually, I'll copy it and comment it again. Now, next I want to do basically is add some dummy data for my cart as well. And we'll be following again the same way. I will do db.get collection. And I will call this collection cards. And then I'll say I want to insert some data. So I'll say dot insert many. And then we'll pass on an array. And this will be a bit different to the one we created earlier because we can't have those nested elements within our database. So the way we'll do it, we'll create an object which have a user ID. Okay, we should pass the user ID. And then we will have another key, which should be the cart IDs, which will be the IDs of the products within the cart of that user. And it will be an array of strings. So I'll say first one is 111, only have one product. Then I'll copy this one basically and create another one for the user with ID 2, which will have two products in their cart. So same thing we had coded earlier as well. Great. Oops, move that. Next thing, basically I want to cancel log this like we did earlier. So I'll just copy basically this and go back up and paste it here and comment it, and it will be cards. And now let's go and open again. And now let's go and run this and see if this will work. So I'll just run again this. I'll say yes. And you can see it's running. I got my that one results undefined. I don't look at that, it's fine. But I can see that I'm getting actually my details back with actual IDs from the database with underscore ID, which means my data has been added successfully to my database. Next thing I want to do is update all our API endpoints so they can use actually data from database instead of reading them from the dummy data in our file. We will start with the easy endpoint, which is to get the list of the products from our database. So first I want to do, before I do that, is to go to my util function and update it. So at the moment, we are not returning anything from this function. We are connecting and that's it. So what I want to do, I want to remove all this from now, from here. After my client connect to the database, I want to return few things. The first one is the client itself, and the second one is the client.db, which gives us back the database. But of course, I'll not return the client.db just like that. I will create a new property which is called db, and then that will be reading the client.db function. Now, next I want to do basically to handle some caching. So whenever I try to get this access to my database, I don't want every time to connect and disconnect from my database. So if I connect once during my application lifetime, it is very enough. So what I will do, I'll create two variables here. Let cached client, and that will be equal to null initially, and then let cached db. Oops, cached db. And that will be equal to null as well. Okay. Now, first I want to do is check if I have my cache client and I do have my cache DB, then you don't have to do all that work that I'm doing right here. All what you have to do, just return this. Okay. And my client will be set to cached client, and my DB will be set to my cache DB. Good. Now next I want to do basically is to set them up. So I'll come here before my return. I'll say if that's first time I'm connecting, then set my cached client to client and set my cached DB to my client.db. Now, next I need to do before I move on, because I'm using types, because this is not happy with this. Also, this is of type Mongo client, or it is null. Okay, and this one will be type of unknown or none. So my TypeScript is happy, now all good. Now next thing basically is to go back to our route for the get product API endpoint. And first thing, let's import this function from there. So I'll come here, I'll remove actually this dummy data from here, I don't need it anymore. So import this MongoDB from our utils function. Okay, great. Now, next we want to do is actually access the DB from this function. So what we can do, come inside our get endpoint, I will create const, and then we will access the DB we are returning right there. Okay, so we say const DB is equal to await, it's a async function, and that's called connect MongoDB. And after we get that, it's basically to get our collection, which is product collection we created earlier. So I say const product, and that's equal also await. We have to await for our database, await db dot collection. And then we will do pass the collection name, which we called product. And then we'll just say find, and I want to get everything, so I'll pass on empty object as a parameter, and then I'll say transform this for me to an array, so to array. Now you can see this is complaining, and that's because the type we added to the DB. So I'll go and change this, and I'll import actually a type which is called DB, and then here instead of and now I'll just say DB. And that should fix this. Now I'll go back there, and that should be good now. Great. Now we have our products. All what we have to do is just send that product as a part of our response. And now we are not hard coding easy anymore. Now next is to go and test it to see if it's working. So npm run dev. Let this one run. And actually, before going testing this, I forgot one important thing is that when you connect your database, you may have a lot of database. And remember the name I gave as audio shop, that is the name of my database, DB, and I have to tell which database should be looking at. So I will say that is shop, that is audio dash shop. I hope I'm remembering the name correctly. Great. Now let's go and test this. I'll go back to my Postman, and I will go to, for example, products API, and actually let's get list of products. So we have slash API slash product, that's it, I get call, and let's send and see if this is working. And that actually is giving back a response of 200 but with an empty array. Okay, so what I found is that actually I forgot another place I need to update as well, which is the return itself. So I have to go right here and update this one as well. Now, if you forget what is the client DB name you created, you can just go click here, there's 3 points, then you can see the MongoDB. Now, if you have a bigger space, so because I zoomed out, I can't see it, you may see this leaf right here, you can click it as well. That is the MongoDB. And then here you can see the list of the shops you have, or actually not shops, the database you have. And you can see that's the one I created, which is the audio shop. All good? So I'll zoom back in here. And now let's go and run this again. Let's go back to my Postman and let's run this again, see if this is going to work now. And yes, finally, we got our list of the product, which are coming actually from our database. Okay, now that we have updated our product endpoints, let's go and actually update the other API endpoint for a specific product details. So let's go back and open up that folder as well. So if you can remember, it's under products. That's the route for it. Let's open up that. Now, instead of importing again dummy data, I'll remove that for now, and I'll paste actually that util function that we need. And our get method, again, our get endpoint should be also an async, so make sure of that. So first thing is basically we need to access our DB, same as we did earlier. So I'll come right inside here, and I'll say const, so DB, and that will be equal to await. And we'll be awaiting for our function, util function, MongoDB, to connect us to our database. After we get the DB, next thing basically is to access the product, okay, or to find the product. Good for us is that before we had to do all this filtering, we don't have to do that anymore. We can just remove this now. And outside the product should be await to my DB dot collection. So you have to define which collection, and the collection will be the products collection that we created. Then we have a built-in function given to us which is called find one. So find one. And this function basically will help us to find a document inside our collection by some field name, okay? And for our case, we'll be finding our products by their IDs. So I'll pass an object, an ID, and the value of the ID will be this ID right here we are reading, okay? So ID, I'll pass on the ID. Oops. I'll pass on the ID, and because they are the same name, I'll just make it short, okay? Now we are finding our product by its ID. Next thing, again, whatever we were doing earlier, we'll just be checking if the product doesn't exist. We'll throw a 404 status. Otherwise, we'll just send back a response with the product details itself. Easy as a pie. Now let's go and run our server. npm run dev. And then we'll go and test this. So my server is running. Yes, it is started. Now I will go to my Postman and I will go to /product and I'll say /111, which is a product that actually exists. Let's click send. And you can see that successfully I got my product details with all the values saved in our database. Now let's test a scenario of a product doesn't exist. I'll say 999, which doesn't exist. I'll hit send, and you can see I'm getting a 404 error response with a message saying the product is not found. Next thing is to update our cart endpoint again to read from our database instead of that hard coding area we created earlier. So let's go inside our API, and it will be in users, then users, user ID, then cart, and then auth.js. Good. Now, what I will do, I will just remove all this from here. I don't need all this. I don't need all that. And let's import our util function. So connect MongoDB from our util function. Then I will come inside my function. Again, it's the get one we're updating now, and it is an async function. So I will access my DB here as well, same as we did earlier. So const DB, it is equal to await, and make sure you're always awaiting for the connection. Connect MongoDB. As soon as I get my DB back, basically I can access my user card. And I'll come after my user ID because we need that to access our user card. So I'll say const user card, and that will be equal to await our db dot collection. And if you remember, we call that collection cards. So cards. And next thing basically is to use a method again, same thing, to find only the documents which have a user ID equal to the current user ID we're searching for. So dot find, or pass on an object where user ID it is equal to the user ID that we got from our params. Good. So first you want to do basics to check if actually that user have a card or not. So if it doesn't, so what I will do, I'll remove all these things from here. So I'll say if the user card doesn't exist, because if it doesn't find one, it will give us back an undefined. Then I'm sending back basically an empty array with a status of 200. So I should not be throwing action error, but the user just doesn't have a card created yet. Okay. Now next thing basically, if we have a user card, next is to find the product, and the way we can do it, I'll just remove all this from now. Actually, to be now much easier than all this code we're doing and filtering IDs that I have within my cards. So const card IDs that I have is equal to my user card dot product IDs. Now next thing basically is to get the list of the products, the actual product we have within our database. So we'll do const, and I'll say cart product is equal to await db dot collection, And of course, for searching for the products themselves, we'll be using the products collection and not the cart collection. Then we use this built-in function for our Mongo, which is fine. But this time we'll use a special operation that they have to help us filtering easily. So I say get me the product with IDs, which is ID here, which is equal basically to whatever those IDs in my current cart IDs. Okay. So the way we can do it, we say that is an object from my operator, $in, and then and then we say cart ID. So basically we are saying give us back all the products, not actually the products, all the documents which have this ID property does exist in that cart IDs array. Okay, and in the end I'll say convert this for me to an array. Now, one thing that I was feeling a little bit confused or maybe wasn't sure what fields I called. For example, when we created our database, if you don't remember, what did you call, for example, this property here, right? Is it user ID or just ID? Or the other property, is it product IDs or just IDs? So you can go back again to your MongoDB extension and go inside your shop or whatever database you created. I called my audio shop. Then I can go and find schemas. Okay, so you can find schema, which is a type. Then I will say this is basically the schema I'm looking at and the cards. So I can see that I have actually user ID, which I'm doing here correct. And the other one is what I'm doing wrong. It's actually card IDs and it's not product IDs. And that should be card IDs. Okay, so that should be good. And then that should be everything as fine. Now, one thing is complaining is because the interface here, it doesn't know what is my user card type. So I have to define the type, what it should be expecting. So that's why it is complaining, just because of the TypeScript. So here are the changes we have made. So first thing is we are able to access our DB again, same as we did earlier. Then we are accessing our user ID from the param, which is our URL. And then first thing we want to do is find the user card in our database. So we'll be awaiting the db.collection, but we'll find the collection of cards now this time. And we'll be using this new function, which is find one, which makes sure it finds that one document in your collection which have a user ID with that same user ID we pass in the parameter. The next thing, we're just making sure we do have a user card, and that user card does have card IDs inside, and it is an array. So we make sure we really have some data for that card, for that specific user. If we don't, for any reasons, either your user doesn't exist, or the user, we have the card but it's empty, or it's just we don't have an array of card IDs, then we give back basically a response with empty array and a status of 200. Otherwise, if we do have the user found, the user card, then we try to access the array of the IDs of the products, which is the card IDs that we stored earlier. Again, you can just make sure you open up that extension of MongoDB on the left, and you can select the database you created, and then you select, for example, the collection you want. So this time we're using the card, and then we can select, for example, the schema, so you know what type of data you are storing if you forget the names of these values. So that's what I did. I just went inside schema, that I see I have the user ID and the card IDs, which is an array. Okay, so in case that you forgot when you're creating the dummy data what names of the keys you have given. Okay, now next thing is basically to go and fetch our product details, and the way we did it, again, we just waited for our database of collection, but now this time we are actually finding the product. So we are trying to get the collection of products. Then we're finding this product with a very special operator here. Okay, not like the one we used earlier. So what we are saying is that go inside my collection of the products, okay, and check with this property, which is ID of the product. Then match any IDs with the values we have in this array. So go check in this array and pick up all the strings we have there and match them to the property ID and give me back all those products with those IDs and give it to me back as an array. So basically it removed a lot of, filter we were doing earlier. We were hardcoding our database. Now next thing, of course, just return back our card product as we did before and give it back to our response with a 200 response. Now what I will do, go save this, and I will go to my Postman, And I'll just run this localhost get call for the user with ID 1, and I'll get the card and make sure in the body you have none, then click send. And there we go, you get a 200 response back. If you go to the body, you'll see that we're getting an array with one product in the response. If you select the second user, if you remember, we do have 2 items. So hit enter, and there we go, we're getting back an array of 2 items. Now let's try to access some user that we don't have in database. Oops, let's go back. Let's say for 4, hit enter, and there we go, we're getting back a response of 200, but we are getting back an empty array as a response, and that is the scenario basically which we handled right here. But we updated our endpoint, which is for the get call to our cart to get the list of the items or products in our cart. Now it is time to move on to the next one, which is the post call, which is for when updating an item within your cart. So we'll be doing exactly same things as we did earlier. So of course, first thing is we want to await for our MongoDB connection and get the DB from it. So I will do the same thing. So I'll just copy that again, go back down here and do the same. So I'm just having access to my DB at the moment. Now next I want to do is get the card collection from my database instead of just getting it from the hard-coded one. So I'll just remove basically all this code right here, and I'll create a new const. I'll say const updated card. Okay, and what I will do, I'll just comment this one for now, comment this one as well. Good. Now my updated card, so that will be coming from my database now. So await db dot collection, and if you remember, the collection name is cards. And then we will use a method which is built-in method with Mongo's, which is called find one and update, which means it will find for us the products and also update for us at the same time, which is great. All those things we had to hard code earlier, we don't have to do it anymore. So dot find one and update. There we go. Then the first parameter will be actually our user ID that we have to pass on, which is for the document ID document that you want to update. So user ID, and we will give it the ID that we get earlier from our params. Then the next thing we want to do is basically pass on an operator that will help us to update our details. And it is kind of similar to the operator we used earlier, which was in, but this one's actually for pushing and adding new items. So we'll create an object, $, push, and then we will say push to cart IDs. And what we'll push is the new product ID that we're getting from our body request. So product ID. Good. Then third parameter will be an object, which kind of we add some option things here that help us with the update. The first one I want to add is upsert. An upsert basically will help to upsert the document if it doesn't exist. It will create a new one if you don't have already one. So as an upsert is true, I want that to happen. And the next one is basically this updated cart constants we're creating. Okay, the one I want it back before really my database updates or after my database gets updated. So I want basically to get the latest update in my database. To do that, I will use this property called return document, and I'll say that's equal to after. So you have 2 properties, either after or before, but for my case today, I want to use the after property. Great. Now I got my updated card from my MongoDB database. Next is actually created or access the cart product. Okay, so I say const cart product, and that will be equal again to await db.collection, and we'll use the products collection, of course, now. And then we'll say find, same what we did earlier as well in the get call. So find, so I'm finding my document using the ID property of the document, and that ID should check. So we use that operator in again, in, and it will be in my updated card dot cart IDs, because now my updated cart will have also the new cart ID as well. So get me all the documents in my product which have IDs equal to whatever IDs in this array right there. Okay, so that is what we did earlier as well right here. Now next thing is just to add to array to make sure we return an array. So to array, and we are done. Now next thing basically just return this cart product. So just remove this code from here and comment this return. And I'm just saying I'm going to return the cart products now within my cart, and status is 201, and headers is actually the content type application JSON. So same what we have done before as well. So I need to go and run my terminal. So npm run dev. Now let's go and open up our Postman. And what I'll go to the post call we had earlier. And let's say, for example, oh, no, first thing, let me test something. So if you remember, we'll test one of the users in the cart, and then we'll try to add some products. So I will say slash users slash user1 slash cart. And let's see the get call, what you will get now here. And you can see for the user one, we have only one product at the moment with ID of 101. Okay, now let's go and add another product to this cart for this user. So what I will do, I'll copy this endpoint and I'll go to another tab. You can create a new tab or just use the same endpoints, which is user one, but is a post call. I want to add a product with ID 555. Okay, and let's go and send. And there we go. As I click send, I'm getting my response back with the updated cart for that user with at the moment 2 items, the first one we had earlier and the one we added now. Okay, now let's imagine you want to add a product that doesn't exist. So we'll go and add 999999 and let's click send. You can see we are getting our response back with 201 created, but we actually only have that product that we already have in our database. So if the product doesn't exist in our database and we're trying to add by ID, it just doesn't do that for us, which is great. And that is the functionality built in here. Basically, you have to find your product with that ID so it can update it for you. Now let's try the scenario where we can create, add an item to a user which doesn't exist. So let's say user 5, and I want to add an actual product which does exist. So I'll change this one to 111, and let's send. And you can see when the user doesn't exist or the product doesn't exist, basically what it did for us now when the user doesn't exist, it does created a new card for us for that user, and it added that product for us as well. Now, if I go here and try to get that user, which is user 5, let's try send. So you are getting actually the user detail card with that one single product we just added earlier. So basically our API endpoint is working as expected end to end. It's time to move on to the delete endpoint and update it as well so it can work with our database. So feel free if you want to stop the course right here and try on your own and see how you go with this. It should be very straightforward and exactly similar to what we have done earlier. And just keep in mind the solutions can differ between people and experiences. So maybe the solution I'll be providing will be different to yours, but as long as it is working and performing as expected, then you should be fine. Now, let me get started with this. So first thing, of course, is to connect to my database as well as we did earlier. So I'll copy this line and just paste it right there. Okay. The next thing basically is here where we do all this logic right there. So I'll remove all this from here. And what I want to do, similar to what we did earlier, is connect to my collection of the cards, find my item, and just pull it out from my cart. Okay, so the way to do that is very simple with Mongo's built-in functions. So as a const updated cart, that will be equal to await db dot collection, and then the collection we'll be waiting for is the carts collection, and then we'll be doing find one and update, And you can see you have another function here for delete, so feel free to use that one as well. It also works similar. So what for me, I'll say find one and update, and I'll use a different operator basically inside. So first thing is to pass the user ID. Of course, I'll say user ID. I'll pass on the user ID that I get from my params. And then next thing I want to do is the operator I'll be using. So before we use the operator push and in, now we'll use another operator which is called pull, which will pull that product or document which have that ID. So I'll say pull from where? From my cart IDs. So from my cart IDs. And what you'll be pulling from there is the product ID that we get from our body request that we want to delete. Great. Now, next thing basically is to add another property or another argument to my function, which similar we did earlier, which I want basically to get my updated cart after all these changes been done to my document. So return document, I'll say after. Good. Now, next thing I want to do basically is to handle a scenario where my cart is empty. So I'll say if I don't have a product cart, no, actually updated cart, then I'll return back a response, and we did this earlier as well, with an empty array. Great. And the response, I'll keep it to 02. Otherwise, if I have an updated cart, what we'll do is same thing we did here to get the cart product. So basically, I'll just copy this one right here and paste it right there after my check. So say my cart product that await DB collection for the product, and we're checking our updated carts here, .cart IDs, and pulling on all the products with those IDs in this array. Okay. After I get my list back, then just send a response back with those cart products. Simple as that. Good. Now let's go and test this. So I'll run my application. So npm run dev, and then go open up my Postman, and let's test one of the users. Actually, let's test this user 5 that we created earlier. So if I send, you'll see that I'll get back one item in the cart. So let this one process. There we go. So what I will do, I'll copy now this one, and I'll open another tab, and I'll paste the same endpoint, but I want a delete option. And if you remember, the ID of the product was 444. Okay. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Which one? Oh yeah, this one. So that's my user 5. It have a product of 1111. So I'll go delete point. I'll go to the body row and pass on product ID, and that will be equal to 111. And now we should have actually nothing left in our cart, which means we have to get back an empty array. So let's send this. And there we go. We got an 202 accepted, and we got back an empty array. Now let's test another user which have multiple products. So let's test the user, and let's make sure I retest this. If I do send, I should get back also an empty array as well. Now let's test the user. I think number 1 have 2 items. So user 1, yeah, it have 2 items with 2 IDs in the products. So let's test the product of 555 for user 1. So we go back here, we say user 1, the product ID is 555, and let's click send. And there we go, we get back actually the cart for the user 1 with only one product left, which is with ID 111. Folks, now let's dive into updating our products page to fetch this data dynamically from our MongoDB database using the endpoints we built earlier. We are going to walk through this step by step like you have never done it before, and no worries, we will break it down again with very simple steps. So let's make this page functional, modern, and also optimized using Next.js best practices. Shall we? Let's get started. Now, first thing is let's understand the magic behind the scenes. Now, your browser basically will make a call or a request to /product. Now, Next.js get this request and call the API route we created earlier, which is /API/products. Now, this API route will fetches the data from MongoDB, the Next.js render the fetched data server side, and send us a fully prepared HTML page back to the browser. And boom, your products will just show up on the screen. This is called server-side rendering, or SSR. It is great for SEO and performance. And now let's go and implement this within our products page. Now, so make sure you go and open up your products page on app/products/page.tsx, and we'll go and add some details right here. Now, first thing is we'll be actually creating or fetching actually data from database, which means there will be async calls. And now here is what we will do. We will basically replace that static product data with dynamic fetch, which will mean that we need to define a component or our component as an async one. And it is very simple with the modern React at the moment. All what we can do is just add async here before the function keyword. So async, and now our component, it is an async component. Now next thing we want to do is fetch the data from our API endpoint. So we will go inside our component here. I'll say const response. That's equal to await. I use a built-in function in JavaScript called fetch. And feel free if you want to use Axios or if you want to use TensorQuery or any other library, you can do so as well. So I'm using fetch. I'm keeping this tutorial very simple. And here basically you just have to point to your endpoint. If you remember, it is on /API/product. But we can't just do that. You have to point to actual your server running as a whole. So feel free to create an EM file if you want to for your public base URL. But I'll just go and do here. So HTTP, so I'll say it's localhost on port 3000. Then /API/products. Now, when I get back my response, I need to get my products from it. So I'll say const product. And that will also be awaiting the response itself. So await response dot JSON. If you remember, we're sending our response as a stringified JSON. So we have to make sure we are converting it back to a JSON. Now, like I said, usually you don't do these things like this here, like the actual base URL, you create an env variable in your env file, and then you just call that env inside your components. So in your real-time application, you don't have to hard code this base URL. And most of you are using different environment, like you have dev environment, SIT environment, and so on. You don't have to hard code that. It's all within your configuration. Okay. Now, let's pass on this products basically as a property for our products component. So we just come copy that and paste it right here, which means we don't need our hard-coded data anymore, right? Now that you have dynamically fetch and rendering the data, time to test this out. So let's go and run our project. So I'll say npm run dev and let that one run. I'll go to my browser and go to /product. So product. And let's test this. I'll make sure I have my network opened. And now we can see successfully our products listed in our browser, and now they are not hard-coded anymore. They are actually coming from our database using the API endpoint that we created. So congratulations to everyone for your work so far. Now let's inspect our page actually to ensure that everything is working properly. So like I have done, I opened already my dev tool. I have my network tab open. So we go and check this products document. And you can see that is our call to our page, and we are getting basically a 200 response. If you go to the response itself, you can see that you get the list of your document page, which is with the header, product, and actually your components also rendering. And reason why is because we're using Next.js and we're using this page as a server-side component, which means all those API calls and building the page is done on the server side, then it is rendering directly on your page ready for you. And that's why it have huge impact on the performance and the SEO search as well. Now let's level up our application by connecting the product details page to an actual API endpoint as well. Instead of relying on that hard-coded data, we'll also handle the 404 scenarios and unexpected errors like pros. So let's get into it. First things that we need to replace the products.find functionality here with actual fetch logic to call our API. Now, let's go first and remove this dummy import here. And also we'll remove this code from here. And let's actually write the code that will handle for us that efficiently. First, we need our try catch block, so it catch any errors for us. Then what we want to do is basically fetch the product details from our API, and we'll use the endpoint that we created earlier. So what I would do, I'll just say const response equal await, and as we have here await, make sure your component it is an async function. So await phase, and this is our endpoint we create was /API/products/ our product ID. Next thing basically to handle the 404 scenario. So if you have like a response status coming with 404, what I want to do basically is just display a basic page with a title saying product not found and having a back navigation button as well as we have right here. Good. Now next thing basically to handle if there are any other errors happening with our response. So to do that, all what I will do is actually fix first here. So if the response doesn't come back with the OK status, I'll just try error saying fail to fetch the product details. Then next thing basically if everything is good and smooth, I will access my product details will be equal to await response.json. And then we should be displaying basically our components as expected. Now, if there's any error happening, what I want to do basically is just throw for now a console error, but you can do more than that, like display some specific UI or anything like that to display the error as well. Now, this product, again, same as earlier, this page here will not have access to it. So I have to define here a product. So I'll say let product. And here we'll just come and remove that const, and then I'll just come here and display my product. Good. Now let's go test this. Of course, there are lots of things you can do with this code. This is just basic, so feel free to play around if you want to enhance it more. So npm run dev, and let that one run. Okay, let me open up my network tab as well to make sure I have eye on my network. Now let's select one of the product, and you can see it's navigating back successfully to my product details, and I'm getting actually my response back as well, the details now from actual database instead of hard coding that. Now, if I go to my network, you can also check here the details, and you can see you don't have any calls here triggered. And reason why is because all these pages are built for you by default in the backend on the server side. So when you call this page or any other one, for example, /11, and we click enter, those pages are actually created. They already load the data and display the page on the server. Then the browser is just displaying the page ready for you. So if you go here /11, that's your actual page, and it's already built. You can see you have your details pre-filled already in your HTML, and you got that ready and you display it on your browser. So basically Next.js, it pre-renders those pages on the server with the fetch data. This ensures the page is fully rendered when sent to the browser. Now your product details page is fully functional, dynamic, and resilient to the edge cases. So congratulations, you have just built a robust product detail page like a pro. So keep coding and keep going and add more exciting features if you want to this application. To work on our cart page, and this updated as well to fetch the details for us using an endpoint and fetch the data from the database instead of hard coding it. Now, first thing, of course, we want to do is get an API call to get the list of the cart IDs of the products. But problem with that now, if we do it, we need to use await and async, which doesn't work within the client-side component. At the moment, our page, it is a client-side component because we need to state. So the way we can do that is use the container and composition pattern in React. So let's do that. So we need to do some refactoring first. So what I will do, I'll create a child component that handle displaying the list of the products, and then my actual cart page, which actually loads the data for me using the API. So what I will do, I'll go to my component folder and I'll create a new item. I'll say carts.tsx, and I'll just generate my component. And this component basically will be a client-side component. So use client. And what I will do, I will just move all the code I have at the moment here to that component. So I'll just cut it from here, just display it there. And this one basically will have a prop coming called initial product, because we'll be able to actually at some point you have to be able to add or delete or actually minus the number of the items for single item, like the quantity of an item and so on. So basically you need a state to handle that. Therefore you need an initial state, initial products, which come actually from the API. Then later you'll be changing that using the state. So for the state management, you can use any method you like. You can use context API or just local state or use a third parties, depend on your project, how big it is, and your state, how much complex it is. I'll cut off all these things right here and just move them to my carts as well. Okay. And next I want to do basically is just go and update. And then that state we are using there will initialize with the initial products list that we'll get from our API. Which means actually this use state, we have to import it from our React. So come here, also import use state. Also, I need to import my type. So import iProduct. Oops. Import iProduct, which is the type interface again. So I'll just say this property, which is initial product, should be actually product. That will be array of this type. So just update this and update that as well. And next thing basically is to remove all this from here. We don't need that anymore. And actually update this cart IDs to actual cart product. So cart product, because now we're getting the list of the products of the cart directly from our API. And that's the one we're reading here. Then I'll just import this component right there. And that should be it at the moment. This one I'll change it, set cart product. That will be using actually later when we want to add an item, for example. Now that is done. Let's make sure first these things are working as expected. I'll just go back to my page itself. I'll display my carts component, which accept a prop, which means I have to make this one basically async. And then I'll come here, I'll say const response is equal to await, and we do fetch, and then we'll just use the endpoint we created earlier as well. So it will be on HTTP localhost 3000, and localhost is wrong. Let me fix that. So localhost 3000, and it was on /API/user/ now we need an ID of the user. So for today's video I'm just going to hard code it, but you can create a dynamic pattern, like if you have authentication or you get an ID from a route, whatever, is up to you how you define your users which are having access to this cart. Okay, so I'll hard code for the user one, then slash, and we have cart. Next is await from my database. So const cart products, and that will await for my response.json. Great. Now this property here, I'll pass it to my cart. So I'll go to cart equal and pass on my cart products I got back from my API. Now I have to remove this use client. I need to remove all these things I'm not using now here. So our page actually now look much better, much cleaner. Now our page actually, it is an SSR component, a server-side component, but this cart itself, it is client. which means our page behind the scene, when we call it off, it will build that page for us using that response. We get that API call done, it will get the data back for us, and then it just waits for the browser to render our page. Then it will render for us this component itself. Now let's go and test this or run my application, npm run dev, and I'll go back to my browser and I'll say slash users slash one slash cart, and let's hit enter, and hopefully I get my endpoint correct. So if I go here, it is app slash cart. Actually, I did wrong. Then my page. Okay, so it is actually app. It is on the cart. Okay, now you can see here I'm getting some errors. Let me open this. So it says that this unexpected doc type is not valid JSON. Okay, let me check what I have done wrong here. And actually make sure again your API endpoint is correct. I just remember that this endpoint was wrong. It should be slash API slash users and not slash user. Then slash whatever the item to user you want to test, and then slash cart. Okay, now you have your application running. Let's go ahead and test this. So I'll just go back to my browser. It's already showing up there, but I'll reload it. And you can see I'm getting now my list of the products. So my current user only have one product in their shopping cart. And if I click view details, I'll be able to navigate to the product details page and see the details successfully. And as soon as I click that, I can see I'm navigated back to the product details page, and I can see the product details successfully shown on my screen. Now let me go back, and I want to display to show you something else. Okay, so you can see here, I don't see my API endpoint actually again triggering because we're using the SSR, but I can see my cart component, and my cart component, when it comes back to my browser again, it's coming fully built. Okay, it's not some HTML ID and it's empty again because it was built on the server side. Already I can see the details prefilled from in the HTML with their CSS style and everything, and then that's coming back fully ready for me to my page. Now, what we are doing here is we are dealing basically between client side and server side components. And usually there are better approaches, of course, to handle this as well, just to avoid some issues. And that's what we'll be talking about in the next chapter. In React 19, the introduction of the use hook allows server-side data fetching to be managed seamlessly in React components and passed down without the need of the redundant logic. And here how you can fix your scenario to leverage the new use hook to handle server-side fetch data passed to a client component child effectively. Now, the use hook simplifies fetching and caching of data for server components, and also it avoids wrapping everything in a sync component and enables better data hydration for the client components. Now, how we can get the benefits on all this. Now, in our case, in this scenario, the cart page component, it is a server component and should be using the use hook to fetch data and pass it down to our client side cart component. And this is how we can implement it. We go back to our server-side component, and what I will do, I'll define an async function that will fetch the cart data for me. So I'll say here a function to fetch cart data. Async function, I'll call it fetch cart data. And basically here we'll just handle all the logic we did right there to fetch the data for us, and also handle some basic error. So I'll paste the code here. So all I'm doing is fetching this API endpoint, getting the data, and also I'm making sure that caching is set to no store to avoid any stale data there for me. Then I'm just making sure that my response comes back with okay, otherwise throw an error. If all is good, just give back my response in a JSON format. Now, after that, this is basically my server component, okay? which is my page at the moment. So instead of doing all this here, I'll remove this and I'll say const cart product. So I'm defining a new constant. And also that's equal to the use, which is a use hook. That means I need to import it from React. Okay. And then I'll pass on basically my async function to this use hook. So fetch oops, that's wrong. Fetch cart data. And we'll be triggering basically the function call right there. Okay. And then we just pass that one as a property to our cards component. Now the cards component, which is a client-side component that receives this data from the server component as a prop, should have, of course, a use client. And why we are mentioning client is because I'm using use state, and we need some interactivity later with this page, like removing item, or for example, adding the quantity of item, which means it's an interactivity with client, and that's why it is a client-side component. Now this component, we don't have to do any changes because as we are passing the prop. So all what we can do is just run now our application, which is running for me, and go and test it and see if it's working as expected. Now this is my cart screen. So what I will do is just hard reload and see if I'm getting my data coming back as expected. Okay, now as I run my application, I can see it's giving me that an error that the page is not working. If I go and open up my VS Code, I can see there's an error in my terminal, which says that some expected, a suspendable, thannable, and this is maybe a bug with React. Well, the problem here basically is we are facing a suspended thannable issue. So React use hook expects an async function or a thannable, a promise that React can suspend on to resolve correctly during the rendering phase. Now, if the function passed to use hook doesn't resolve as expected or throws an error, React can encounter these issues. Now, there are other problems can face as well because of this. So if you use, for example, the use hook in a component that's not structured properly, like an async function wrapped incorrectly, React doesn't know how to handle these async calls as well. There are other also problems that you can trigger this, which is like, for example, versions mismatching between React and Next.js, which we don't have at the moment. Now, to fix this, it is basically a very simple fix to do, and you may be already familiar with this process if you used the lazy loading before. The way you can do it is basically handling the suspense in page.tsx file. It is really straightforward because server components inherently support React suspense as well. And here how we can do this. So I'll go and create a new component. So I'll create actually a new folder for pages just to structure my project properly. And I'll create, for example, cards pages.tsx. I'll generate my component here. I'll keep that as the name. Then I'll move actually all my code here to that component. And also my code inside here today. So what I want to do basically, I want to be able to suspense my page. To do that, I have to wrap it as a whole within a suspense component within my page.tsx. So that's why I'm creating actually new components for the actual page, which I'll be suspending next in my page.tsx. Now, next thing basically is to return a suspense, which I need to import from React. And this suspense basically takes in a prop called